G'day, May 40 here. So another killing by ICE is dominating the news. And I'm just struck by how every fiber in my being wants to defend ICE. Like every fiber of my being supports immigration restriction, supports deporting anyone who's in the country illegally, supports the Trump administration. And so we get another killing. And I just notice how my mind just goes to all the ways that this killing was justified. But I thought, I need to make a status play here. I need to transcend my tribal impulses. Let's try to get the 10,000-foot perspective. And maybe reactions to this case, they come down to focus on legality versus necessity and how the left is primarily focused on law and procedure and institutions and means rather than ends. And the Trump administration is very Schmittian. They are looking at the necessity of the situation, and necessity sometimes knows no law. But then I realized that these arguments are subsumed by a greater theory, more important theory, more useful theory, and that is alliance theory, that what we have going on here is a battle between two different coalitions, two different alliances for the coercive power of government. And so for the left, when arguing law, procedure, and protecting institutions, when that is in their favor, right, when that works to their advantage, then they're going to argue for following the rule of law and following procedure and following whatever strengthens our institutions. And I was thinking about, I just instinctively side with law enforcement. And then I thought, well, I wasn't siding with law enforcement when the FBI was going after Donald Trump. So there is a much more important lens to look at these things through rather than, say, legality versus necessity. And I can't think of any more important lens to understand politics right now than alliance theory. Now, maybe there's a better theory out there, but it fundamentally comes down to human beings are wired to form alliances because, as the intro to A Football Life says, football taught me that life is a team sport. So usually a group strategy will outcompete an individual strategy every time. And so we're just wired to form alliances, and then we are wired to create propaganda that strengthens our side, makes our side feel finer, better, more moral, more righteous, and similar arguments to then bring down and reduce legitimacy and to hurt the other side. And so that's the purpose of most political arguments and opinions, to strengthen your side and to hurt the opponent. So I think this Game of Thrones approach to political theory is quite useful. I can't think of anything superior. And the primary bloke behind it is David Pinsoff, who's an evolutionary psychologist at UCLA.
You have to choose between me and Bob. Sorry, I have to choose between you and Bob. You have to choose between me and Bob. And Bob has to choose between you and me. If any two of us mutually choose each other, those two players win 1 point, and the excluded third player loses 1 point. So, for example, if you and I choose each other, we win a point, Bob loses a point. If Bob and I choose each other, we win a point, you lose a point. If you and Bob choose each other, you win, I lose. And if we each choose one of the other players, forming a kind of love triangle, then none of us get anything. So, we all get 0. The point of the game is mutual choice. Okay. You know how the game works. It's time to make your choice. Please silently, in your head, choose between me and Bob. I will choose between you and Bob in my head. And please try to win the game. Take it seriously. Okay. Has everyone made their choice? Okay. Raise your hand if you chose Bob. Oh, a few of you. Interesting. What's the logic behind your choice there? Curious. An alliance is a coordinated, mutually beneficial relationship that comes at a cost to others. So we played with 1, 0, and -1 as the 3 possible outcomes. But the absolute values or magnitudes of these numbers do not actually matter for our purposes. To qualify as a simple majority game, all that matters is that the outcomes are ranked in the following order: Number one, forming an alliance. That is the best possible outcome. Number two, nobody forms an alliance, or we form a love triangle. That is the intermediate level outcome. And number three.
So I am friends with Nathan Coffness. I respect Nathan Coffness, the philosopher. But I don't think that Nathan Coffness, the philosopher, is an expert on politics. And success in politics isn't primarily about morality, principle, ultimate truth. It's primarily about how do you strategically form alliances so that you can seize the coercive power of government.
Three, exclusion from an alliance. That is the worst possible outcome. So you might be wondering, do people actually play this game in real life? Is this relevant to human social behavior? I think the answer is yes, and we're going to look at some examples. So my favorite example is inspired by the 2019 film The Favorite, directed by Yorgos Lanthimos. And here's how the favoritism game works. It's a 3-player game. And if any 2 players favor each other, they provide each other with special benefits that they don't provide to the third. So, for example, they might praise each other while dissing the third player behind their back. Or they might share secrets with each other that they don't share with the third player. Or they might invite each other to cool parties that they don't invite the third player to. Or they take each other's side in conflicts against the third player should either of them get into a fight with the third player. The 2 favorites gain a benefit from doing this, which we will define with the parameter V. V can be as big or as small as you want it to be. It doesn't matter. And the excluded third player pays a cost from this, which we're going to define as negative C. So here we are at the start of the game. Here's what happens if you and I form an alliance against Bob. Bob is not very happy about this. So the payoffs are ranked in the right order. Forming an alliance is the best outcome, nobody forms an alliance is the intermediate outcome, and exclusion is the worst outcome. Here's another example, the grabbing game. We each have a resource, V. If no alliance forms, we each keep our resource. If an alliance forms, the 2 allies grab the third player's resource and split it between themselves. We assume that the third player submits to the alliance without a fight, out of fear, or perhaps with fighting costs lower.
So after I read about the killing in Minnesota, after I read about it in the New York Times, I immediately wanted to go to X to find how do people on my side view things. Right? I wanted to get the perspectives, get the arguments from my side. And here we go. Stephen Miller, right, talks about when Charlie Kirk was shot. The leading conservative influencer in the country, shot in the neck in front of the entire country. 0 businesses boarded up. Yes, my side's more righteous. Now we have all these businesses near the shooting in Minneapolis are boarding up. National Guard activated. Right, my side's so much more righteous. Right, here's another argument. In concealed carry weapons class, they tell you have a heightened duty to avoid potential fights while armed as a matter of legal and practical self-preservation. So this guy who was killed in Minnesota, he went to a protest, he fought with law enforcement, and he was armed. He both had a gun and he had abundant ammunition, right? You don't want to raise the stakes to death in a fight, and you really don't want to do that with law enforcement. Right? You don't want to provoke a fight while armed to bait someone into a self-defense situation. So these anti-ICE protesters have inverted the duties of being an armed citizen, right, or a citizen in control of a lethal instrument such as a car in a traffic stop. So they are deliberately creating situations of maximum ambiguity with a low-level threat of lethal danger to beat law enforcement and making them heroic victors or martyrs, being an observer of law enforcement while also armed, and then getting into a shoving match with law enforcement. It's a terrible idea, even if you think the law empowers you to play the I'm not touching you game. I'm struck by how many people on the left are making the argument that he had the legal right to carry. Right? There are all sorts of things that you have the legal right to do that will place you in great peril. For example, one morning in 1986, I was feeling good. I was feeling happy. I was listening to music. And often when I'm happy listening to music and driving, I am exceeding the speed limit. And so this morning I was exceeding the speed limit. And I was coming down a hill, and I was just flying, and I just went right through a red light. And there were all these other cars that were lined up who had the right of way to cross in front of me. Thank God none of them insisted on being dead right. I was in the wrong, and they had the right of way, but luckily they did not insist on being right. And we have a good teaching in California traffic law, don't be dead right. And even if this guy was legally in the right, how much comfort is that to the people who love him now that he's dead? To me, the legality is some type of an action of choice. It is sometimes less important than the necessity. So I don't know if this guy drew his gun at any point in the struggle, but to get into a fight, a physical fight with a cop while armed, right, you have a very serious chance of dying. I just can't imagine choosing to deliberately get into a fight with a cop. In my every interaction with law enforcement, has law enforcement always been a model of professionalism? No. Sometimes cops have been jerks, but it would never occur to me to verbally fight with a cop, let alone physically fight with a cop. I was raised middle class, basically with a safety first mentality. I don't understand all these people who think it's a good idea to try to de-arrest people. Have you even heard of de-arrest? I'd never even heard of it, but apparently it's a thing. Right? To try to stand between law enforcement and the people that they want to arrest. It's a tactic, and it's taught, and it just strikes me as crazy dangerous. Right? Have you heard of de-arresting? So it's a tactic where a group of people physically intervene to prevent an individual from being taken into police or federal custody. This seems to be overwhelmingly a left-wing phenomenon, right? You swarm law enforcement officers, you pull the person away, you block the path of law enforcement, right? So in this case of Alex Pretti, he was attempting to help a woman whom federal agents were handling when that struggle that led to his death began. So all these protesters are using physical force, numbers, loud whistling, screaming, diversions to try to free someone who's being restrained or handcuffed. So activists frame this as community self-defense. Law enforcement categorizes it as obstruction or interference. So these are the main methods to engage in de-arresting, swarming. So a large group surrounds the arresting officers to overwhelm them and create enough chaos for the arrestee to escape. The pullback, when an officer tries to secure someone's arms or legs, others grab the arrestee's belt or torso to pull them in the opposite direction. The circle, protesters lock arms to create a human barrier between the police and the person being detained. I dated this Jewish woman, and she was proud that she'd been arrested at a protest and how they learned these various techniques to make life harder for police. It just struck me as insane. And then I was with her at a dog park, and police gave her one warning that she needed to have her dog on a leash. And so she put her dog on a leash, the police left, and then she took the dog off the leash. Police came back, and they gave her a ticket, and she just started mouthing off at the cops. It was just struck me as insane. I can only conclude she'd never been punched in the face. So I think most every man has been punched in the face, and it's a life-changing experience, right? You learn that there are certain ways you do not speak to people. There are certain situations where you do not mouth off because getting punched in the face sucks. And I think many middle-class women in particular have never been punched in the face, and so that part of reality is not so clear to them. Now, attempting to de-arrest someone is virtually always a crime in the United States. You're going to get charged with obstructing a peace officer or resisting arrest, assaulting a federal agent. And I was all high and mighty about my legality versus necessity analysis. And then I realized, what about in all those blue jurisdictions where anti-Trump protesters just get released? So the Democratic Party's allegiance to law and order and procedure, it doesn't seem to hold up when enforcing the law would require arrests and convictions of their side. So anti-Trump protesters tend to get away with an enormous amount in Democratic Party-controlled jurisdictions. People in the Democratic Party coalition who legally own handguns seem to get away with that much more in Democratic Party coalitions. In Democratic-controlled strongholds that have sanctuary policies, you don't have law enforcement cooperating with ICE, which then precipitates the very conflicts that you see in Minnesota. So I just realized this left-wing commitment to law and order and procedure and legality, it's just a tactic when they see that procedure is on their side. When procedure is not on their side, then they are not all in. And I was just thinking, what if we had a Democratic Party president and he sent troops into a red state to enforce some diversity mandate, and then you had right-wing protesters and you had a kind of a mirror image of these protests? I'd probably side with the protesters, right? My political beliefs may not emerge from my deep moral values, such as my commitment to fairness or hierarchy or authority, right? Maybe I form alliances first, and then I adopt these patchwork narratives that best protect my side and are most effective against the enemy. And I think this theory is very useful when trying to understand what the heck is going on in Minneapolis.
The protests in Minneapolis capture an underappreciated fact about the Democratic Party. It is configured to react in unreasoning rage to everything President Trump does.
We cannot counter Donald Trump's chaos with our own brand of chaos.
The challenge of messaging, how to condemn roundups of illegal migrants without defending protesters' lawlessness, is only a symptom of the problem.
Go lick food somewhere else.
The problem arose from a Byzantine network of activist nonprofits created and fostered over the past decade by liberal foundations and progressive billionaires. It started more or less in 2010 during negotiations on a cap-and-trade bill that in part aimed to put a price on carbon emissions.
You've got an independent in Joe Lieberman, you've got a Republican in Lindsey Graham, and you've got a Democrat in John Kerry that are working through a proposal on comprehensive energy legislation.
2 months later, the bill was dead. Animated by fears of global catastrophe, wealthy foundations and donor-class ideologues decided they couldn't achieve their goals by democratic persuasion and had to create an army of nonprofit groups to wage legal and political war on the imagined enablers of climate change. The money soon flowed to other areas, as money does. The flow accelerated during the pandemic and George Floyd riots in 2020.
There was an acknowledgement that time was absolutely of the essence.
Everything that we're seeing in terms of economic inequality, injustice, flaws in the system have been accentuated by the pandemic.
For the first time, perhaps ever, many donors are starting to acknowledge that equity is an important lens that they need to view their work through.
Those to benefit from this newfound interest included advocacy and activist organizations, pushing causes including social justice.
So we don't tend to come from our moral principles first. We tend to come from our alliance first, because that's just more adaptive. Our ancestors who put principles first would be less likely to reproduce, right? It would make them less adaptive to changing and dangerous situations. So we tend to use morality much more as a propaganda tactic rather than as a consistent rule. So if you're supporting ICE and immigration restriction, then here you're going to side with the principle of authority, that the federal agents have a legal right to enforce immigration laws. The local protesters, they will focus on other rights and principles of sovereignty that favor them. So people who support law and order will support law and order as long as law and order is aligned with their side. When law and order is aligned against them, they'll stop supporting law and order. My instinct is to support ICE, but if a Democratic president sends troops into a red state to enforce diversity mandates, right, I'd probably side with the protesters. So my moral stance on protest depends entirely on whether the agents are my allies or my enemies. So to protect ICE, to protect the Federal Alliance, to protect Trump and MAGA, then you must neutralize and reduce the status of the victims. So people on the immigration restriction side, we have every incentive to try to denigrate Renee Good and Alex Pretti. These are threats, these are criminals, these are people out of line with appropriate behavior. And if you're against Trump and against ICE, then you're going to do the opposite. You're going to emphasize that Pretti is a VA intensive care nurse and Renee Good was a mother of three, right? You want to make the agents look like pure evil twirling their mustaches. So when our alliance is under threat, right, we will use every possible tactic on our behalf. So in Minnesota, people are no longer just debating immigration policy. They're engaged in a raw struggle for the coercive power of government. And every piece of evidence, whether it's a 9mm handgun or a cell phone, right, every piece of evidence is simply another tool used to bolster one side, crush the other. Now, there were two paragraphs on the New York Times that struck me. So a VA physician who worked with this nurse, Mr. Pretti, he was your typical struggling young person with a lot of ambition but no direction yet. But he knew he wanted to help people in some way or another. Second paragraph. Footage of the shooting in the moments preceding it posted to social media shows Mr. Pretti stepping between a woman and an agent who is pepper spraying her. So he's engaging in de-arresting, which is a taught tactic by these left-wing agitators. And it just strikes me as incredibly reckless. And I just think this description rings true to me. Typical struggling young person with ambition but no direction. So I suspect Pretti was not married. I suspect he did not have kids. If he had normal adult responsibilities, I can't imagine he would have acted this recklessly. Right? He's searching for a path to glory. Right? He's looking for a way forward in life, and these protests energize him. And so he steps up. And before the shooting, he was out there directing traffic. Right? He had no authority to direct traffic. So I remember a director with the National Film Board of Canada. He followed me around on and off for a year and ended up directing a documentary called Give Me Your Soul. And one thing he noticed about me was my yearning for glory. And people who don't have kids, in particular, just have a yearning for excitement and often a yearning for glory. That if you have children, your yearning for excitement is pretty much going to be met by having kids. But yearning for glory is fine, but not every situation requires you to step up, right? Sometimes you have to ask, is it my duty, is it my responsibility here to step up, right? Just because you want to be a hero, that's not an all-access path to life, right? It was not this guy's place to step between the police and that woman. It was not his place to be directing traffic. It was not his place to be interfering with law enforcement. And I'd have to think if he'd built anything precious in his life, he would not have thrown it away as he did. Right? Even if he was legally right in every single thing he did, right? Nobody sane wants to be dead right. And all these people noting on social media, he has the right to carry out a protest. Yeah, but you don't have a right to impede a federal operation. You don't have the right to stand in traffic. You don't have the right to interfere in an arrest. You don't have your right to put your hands on a police officer. You don't have a right to resist arrest. I remember one time I was staying with a family, and the young teenage boy was a little troubled. And one day I made a mistake. I put my hands on him. I said, stop doing this. And in response, he went and grabbed a knife and started waving at me. And I ran out the door, ran to the synagogue, and called the police on him. And eventually the police showed up. And I'm trying to show the officer what happened, and I put my hands on the officer and said, "Don't do that." And then he also told me, because you initiated the physical confrontation, you put your hands on him, right? You don't have any case. You don't have any right to get this guy arrested because you initiated it. And I remember when I spoke to his mother, boy, the mother was just spitting mad at me. She said, "Why didn't you call me at work? Why'd you have to call the police?" Oof.
Justice, Palestinian statehood, LGBTQ rights, and, as ever, climate sustainability. Mackenzie Scott, ex-wife of Jeff Bezos, has given $26 billion since 2019. But other billionaires with left-leaning proclivities include Michael Bloomberg, George Soros, Tom Steyer.
So every fiber of my being sides with ICE and immigration restriction and this federal law enforcement operation. Every single fiber of my being. On the other hand, I do have to admit that the liberal news media, the New York Times, seem to be right that many parts of the narrative put forward by the Trump administration does not appear to be truthful. and the shooting seems to be a shooting of an unarmed man. This shooting of Pretti seems to have occurred after they confiscated his weapon. Now, I don't blame the officers, because Pretti created a situation of great tension. And so he upped the ante, and as a result, you had federal officers who had legitimate fear for their own safety who ended up shooting him.
Philanthropy, if we invest.
So who's right is one question, but how it plays is probably a more important question, and it seems to be right now this is playing in favor of the Democrats.
Through the lens of justice, we can advance that reality.
Today, about half of the electorate disapproves of the arrests and deportations of immigration and customs enforcement officers. But the anti-ICE protests in Minneapolis aren't primarily, or maybe at all, the spontaneous uprisings of an outraged citizenry.
They're breaking windows, dragging pregnant women down the street, just plain grabbing Minnesotans and shoving them into unmarked vans.
And I blame Democratic politicians like Tim Walz for inciting and encouraging these protests and upping the ante so that you have more and more tension with ICE's law enforcement operation. And people like Tim Walz, I think, played a significant role in encouraging protests that make these federal agents feel under great stress and strain and danger.
Kidnapping innocent people with no warning and no due process.
Governor Tim Walz, in a televised address that sounded like a narration of Kristallnacht, urged viewers to record ICE operations on their iPhones.
Take out that phone and hit record. Help us create.
So if you were to have a tense interaction with someone and you pulled out your phone and hit record, you're dramatically upping the ante, right? You are making the situation much more combustible. And I'm not saying don't record, do record, but let's be real. That makes the situation much more tense and much more dangerous. And if you initiate this kind of confrontation, then right, you're much more likely to pay a very stiff price. And let's go to the chat. Robert Walter says, I've been looking at all the Jewish appointments to TikTok and to Harvard and many other institutions in the last year. Yes, Ashkenazi Jews have an average IQ of 110, 112. And so you would expect them to be disproportionately appointed to these positions. And Robert says, I'm not 100% sure JD Vance is going to be president. I'd say he has to be the favored one right now. And Robert says, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a military man who knows exactly what is going on to hammer down this situation. Like who? Who do you think is more likely at this point to be president than JD Vance? Israel could control every media organization in the United States and they still would not have power, but they want to control the United States. Well, I'll give you this. There are no pundits who are anti-Israel in the mainstream media, or very few for many years. So overwhelmingly, the chattering class in the mainstream media was pro-Israel. Now you have a reaction to elites and elite control, and along with that comes a growing skepticism of the value of the Israel alliance. Did I see the interview between Elon Musk and Larry Fink? No, but I saw an excerpt of it where Larry Fink said some surprising things. I was shocked at how little security he had. You mean Larry Fink or Elon Musk? Right, when it comes to driving, even if the cops make the mistake, I don't get upset. I smile, I wave, I'm kind. Yeah, it's not worth getting into confrontations with people who are carrying weapons. I'm shocked at the amount of restraint that ICE is using. Yeah. If they were to show the injuries that ICE are taking, right, I think the average citizen would be shocked. The Democratic Party is just a coalition of anti-whites. It's not just a coalition, but yes, the Democratic Party has an anti-white bias because that is the current alignment of the alliance for the Democratic Party, just as the Republican Party coalition tends to have a pro-white bias. This is not inevitable. It's just how the alliance structure works. Luke, what do you think about the total re-migration debate they're having in the UK? Interesting. I wonder how feasible it is. Why can't they just enforce E-Verify? It's a lack of will. If the Trump administration had the will to enforce E-Verify, they could enforce E-Verify. Right? Why can't they just fine and jail landlords who rent to illegals? I don't know if it's illegal to rent to illegals, but if it is, then yeah, let's do it. I'm for doing everything to make life difficult for people who are in the country illegally. Also for enforcing E-Verify and making it increasingly difficult for employers to hire people who are in the country illegally. Luke knows how to charm and finesse the Yenta mamas. Sometimes, right, I have an ability to connect sometimes quickly and form bonds quickly with some people, and then other people are just utterly immune to my charm. So in Australia, rents are going up about 8% a year, but according to Gemini, rents went down overall in the United States because 2.5 million people, foreign-born people, left the United States during the first year of the Trump administration. So I think there are a lot of benefits to reducing the number of illegals. All right, scrolling through the chat. Yeah, perhaps Tim Pool will finally get his wish, constantly declaring civil war. Well, look at the incentives for the talking head, right? The more exciting you can make things, right? The more excitement, the more intense the emotions that you can trigger in people, the more intense the following you will develop, even if it's false. So Tim Pool creates all these exciting narratives that I don't think tend to be grounded in reality. Americans are too used to Harry Potter, Disney, Hunger Games, and anime. They're too infantilized. Ones who think that they can film police without harassment. Even if it's not an arrest, yeah, police aren't going to be very happy. So each group prioritizes its own survival, I think. Mr. Paul, would you recommend getting a septoplasty? Did it make a difference? Well, I first have to figure out what a septoplasty is.
A database of the atrocities against Minnesotans.
Ordinary people don't do that. Nor do they post ads on social media platforms targeting hotels that rent rooms to ICE agents. Activists do these things.
Okay, I guess I did have a septoplasty. That's a turbinate reduction. And all my turbinates grew back within, it feels like about 3 months. Maybe my memory is distorted. Maybe it was 6 months. So it didn't make much long-term difference for me. Your mileage may vary. One thing I found helps is reduce dairy in the evening so that my nose doesn't get stuffed up at night. And then I have these incline pillows. One's 3-inch incline, another's 8-inch incline. So the more stuffed up I am, the more of an incline I need to free up my nose. Also, putting on a CPAP tends to open up my nasal passages. Trump is talking amnesty. Trump says so many different things. It's bewildering. He's not exactly a man of consistency. Moral men are expected to be principled. Well, people tend to be moral in domain-specific ways. So you may have an accountant who's moral in his accounting, but that doesn't mean he's going to be moral in the way he conducts his marriage or his family life or his hobbies or his spare time. Or someone might be loyal to their spouse but not loyal to their employer. In all cases, either long-term or short-term, the right wins. Simply because of natural law, you can only swim upstream so long before you get tired. Yeah, to the extent that the right aligns with reality, the right is going to be more successful. Right, reality always wins.
Back in 2018, members of the Sunrise Movement, a group that organizes youth around climate issues, were arrested as they staged a sit-in at the office of then House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. It was attended by freshman Congressman AOC.
Yes, we can mobilize small dollar donations. We can mobilize small everyday people's contributions, but we can also mobilize everyday people to action.
Today, Sunrise wants a piece of the anti-ICE action. According to a Washington Free Beacon report, Sunrise is training activists to do things like plague hotels and car rental companies that do business with ICE. One of Mr. Soros's...
And the chat says that if a civil war breaks out in the United States, Jews should flee the United States. Yes, Jews or any minority should flee a civil war because minorities usually depend upon strong centralized law enforcement. And when strong centralized law enforcement breaks down, they will become increasingly vulnerable. Jews have not usually been popular with their host population, so they have struck deals with the central power where in exchange for protection, they would do the following favors for those who have power. So sometimes that meant alliances with monarchy or just means alliances to ensure safety. So most sane groups are going to be safety first, seek protection, and whatever tactic is necessary to pull that off.
Organizations, Open Society Foundations, has given Sunrise $2 million since 2019. Meanwhile, the MacArthur Foundation gave $250,000 in 2024, and the Ford Foundation $700,000 over the past 2 years.
The No Kings protests, orchestrated by left-wing non-profits in dozens of cities during the fall of 2025, were heavily funded by a variety of activist philanthropies.
Notes Carl Zinsmeister in his book Sweet Charity. Mr. Zins.
So you'll notice in the chat that Robert Walters is not angry at Jews. Robert Walters hates Jews. So just reading a couple of academic papers, they made this vital, I think, distinction between anger and hatred. So anger is a bargaining ploy for better treatment. So we get angry at a spouse or a parent or a sibling or an employer or a coworker. We get angry at people when we want to bargain for better treatment. But when we come to realize that someone or some group is inimical to our welfare, that they are just bad for us, then you're not angry at them, right? What comes over is hatred. And hatred is a desire to neutralize some other party. So neutralize might mean move away from. Neutralize might mean diminish, demean, form coalitions against, or sometimes neutralize means the act of killing. So anger is in your face often, right? Anger is incredibly visible and confrontational. Hatred, not so much. So you can have a cold hatred of someone and it's not obvious, and someone may be completely unaware that you hate them. So hatred is quite distinct from anger. Right? Hatred is triggered by cues that some other individual's or group's existence causes your fitness to diminish. Right? You so many costs associated with this hated person that it motivates your spiteful behavior. So you try to heap costs upon the target of your anger. So if you hate someone, you will try to diminish his allies. You will lie about the person. You will look to just put as many costs on the person as possible and try to make their life as difficult as possible. And this also creates a perverse incentive. If you harm someone unjustly, you will then trigger hatred because you realize that they are now an enemy who will likely work against you in the future. So their continued existence is bad for you. And so you're very likely to hate anyone who you have unjustly harmed. And I think we see the difference between anger and hatred in the European and Canadian reaction to Trump over the past 2 weeks. Trump's antics over Greenland shifted the Prime Minister of Canada and many leading Europeans from an attitude of anger and bargaining for better treatment to just hatred and a desire to neutralize Trump. So anger is a way to orchestrate bargaining tactics when other people put too low a weight on your welfare. And then we feel gratitude to try to develop a higher level of cooperation. When people are helping us more than we expect, we feel pride when we recognize how much that we contribute to people around us. We feel shame when we recognize that if more people realize what we've just done, they will put less care and concern on us. And so we try to ameliorate something we've done that damages our reputation with other people. Or if we anticipate doing something and then the shame that would go with that act, right? We viscerally experience what would happen if people in our life cut us off or put less value on us. It's called W2ER, welfare trade-off ratio. So the less value other people put on you, right, the less care and concern they will put forward, the less they will do for you. We feel guilt, right, when we recognize we need to prevent or remedy events where we have put too low of a weight on the welfare of another, sometimes unintentionally. So guilt and shame are highly related. In guilt, the outcome is to be avoided is imposing harm on someone we value. So we're going to feel guilt if we recognize that we have harmed or are likely to harm someone by inadvertently not according them sufficient value. Then in shame, we don't want to be devalued by others. And so you can feel both shame and guilt about the same act, but these are both evolutionarily evolved functions. They both lead to internal recalibrations. They're painful, right? Pride feels good, shame and guilt feel bad, but you might feel guilt and shame about infidelity, right? So you might refrain from it. But if you still carry on with your infidelity, you might feel just shame, but not guilt, because you're going to try to conceal it. So shame and pain cause personal suffering, and they often lead to hostile behavior, but it's not maladaptive, right? These ugly emotions are expressions of an evolutionarily evolved system that is elegantly designed to deter bad choices and to help us make the best of a bad situation.
Zinsmeister tallies 203 separate nonprofit protest sponsors. Donor class progressives no doubt believe they're helping Democrats and hurting Mr. Trump by shoveling so much money at left-wing nonprofits. But are they? Plainly, the anti-Israel protests of 2024 complicated Kamala Harris's task of finding a running mate.
What about Shapiro in Pennsylvania?
I'm not really commenting on I'm commenting on who I think would be a great choice.
Professional nuisances detract attention from things Democrats would rather talk about, like affordability and health care, and force their intended Democratic beneficiaries to instead defend lawbreakers and inflame voters with stories of fascistic thuggery.
It's a campaign of organized brutality against the people of Minnesota by our own federal government.
This is the world wealthy liberals created when they decided climate change and, later, systemic racism and all the other so-called existential causes required extra democratic action. It amounts to a...
So why is the rhetoric so intense? Because the stakes are so high. Arguing over politics is arguing over who should have the power to coerce. In the final analysis, government is backed up by law enforcement who has the ability to kill you, to imprison you, and that's why people are reacting with such intensity. And each side will come up with whatever argument they think strengthens their coalition and diminishes the rival. So it's interesting to see Europe and Canada increasingly flirt with China because they're so stung by things that Donald Trump has said. And it's also interesting to watch Europe and Canada increasingly try to suppress populism. So populism means that wisdom resides with the people, that people basically have good inclinations for the most effective use of government. And leaders in Europe, in Canada, in Australia are all creating increasingly harsh restrictions on speech. We have ever more effective elite collusion in Canada, Australia, and Europe. And we have more and more of a desire by the ruling parties to have power in the hands of experts. And the further you go left in the political spectrum, the more people believe in rule by experts rather than rule by the people. So European elites now talk about China as a more stable partner than the United States, and they admire China's capacity to get things done. And another thing they admire about China is that communism is the ultimate expression of rule by experts. The will of the people means very little in a communist state. So European and Canadian elites hate Donald Trump, and they think he's a threat to democracy and a threat to their liberal perspective. And so they're reacting by embracing China, which you would think represents more of a threat to liberalism. So in the United States, you have this elite collusion between universities, federal agencies, NGOs, major media, corporate bureaucracies, HR departments, right? And together, all these institutions define the Overton window, what you're allowed to talk about, what you're allowed to say, and dissent is increasingly treated as a governance problem rather than a political one. And power is shifting from legislatures to administrative agencies, and debate is being replaced by compliance. And you see this with regard to misinformation. So populist and conservative claims are not merely argued against, they're now classified as dangerous, and they are rooted around through platform moderation, institutional sanctions, informal blacklists. And so you have this public-private fusion between elites in Europe and Canada and Australia, where speech is increasingly curtailed, not just by open censorship, but by coordinated pressure across state and corporate systems. And this is all justified in the name of saving democracy from instability. But the cure is to steadily dissolve the power of the people. So outcomes are increasingly insulated from the voters, entrusted to an expert class. The will of the people is something that needs to be corrected rather than obeyed. And so the further left you go, the more democracy is treated as a problem to be managed rather than as a source of authority.
Then the value of the resource split two ways. So here we are at the start of the game, each with our own private resource, V, and here's what happens if you and I form an alliance against Bob and take his resource. Again, we have a simple majority game. The best outcome is forming an alliance. The intermediate outcome is if nobody forms an alliance. And the worst outcome is if you're excluded.
And the chat says, Luke, you talk like everyone has a claim over the West, no matter the tribe. This is not happening in Africa or Israel or Asia. They rule themselves, and the West has to permit anyone to rule us? No, I don't believe anything is guaranteed, right? Rule is determined by those who have the discipline and the strength and the power to rule. Nobody has a right to anything. Jews don't have a right to Israel. Japan doesn't have a right to Japan. What matters is who has the discipline and the power to seize power and to defend themselves. Right? Nobody came out of the ground, right? We all move from somewhere, and people move around. And in the final analysis, power is not dictated by moral principles, right? Power is dictated by the effective use of force. And so to the extent that Jews were simply more effective in developing their nationalism and seizing power in what is now the Jewish state of Israel, right? They created their own state. And to the extent that the Palestinians were less effective, right, they have had to suffer. I would much rather those with the coercive power of the state, right, be on my side. I would much rather form an alliance, create alliances that allow people who are favorably disposed to me to be in power. So I'm not a big proponent of Israel's right to exist or anyone's right to exist. You have to work to create a governing alliance to defend your right to exist.
From an alliance. This might be the most relevant game for our purposes. This is inspired by a mathematical model by the political scientist Kathleen Bond. It's called the policy game. We each want to pass a policy that provides a benefit to us, V, while inflicting a cost, negative C, on others. For example, I want to pass a tariff that protects my business from foreign competition while increasing prices for you and Bob. You want to pay off your student loan debt using tax dollars from me and Bob. Bob wants to remove regulations on his factory so he can pollute the air that you and I breathe.
And the chat says, how many Europeans are in the government or parliament of an Asian or African country? Give me one example. There is none. Well, if that's true, why are Europeans so pathetic? Right? Why are they so lousy at playing the game of power?
We assume that V is greater than C, that is, the benefits to the...
So for many centuries, Europe dominated the globe. And now Europe seems relatively pathetic compared to the power of the United States and China. So what happened? Why did Europe become so pathetic and weak?
Policy stakeholder are larger than the costs inflicted on others, which are often hard to detect. So here we are at the start of the policy game with our preferred policies. And here's what happens if you and I form a political alliance or a political party and pass our preferred.
So after the shooting, I went on X to look for my preferred narratives, right, to support my side. Here's one. The repeated assurance that armed protesters are directing traffic in places they have no right to be legitimizes insurrection. Yeah, this is insane. They're setting up vehicle checkpoints, like they get to say who can go where. I remember on American university campuses, anyone who was a Zionist often was not allowed to fully use the university campus. I mean, Alex Pretti was a traffic cop, right? What in God's name did he think he was doing? He got out of touch with reality. And it says, days ago, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz released an inflammatory video filled with lies, told people to increase their confrontations with federal agents. He suggested they do this by following them and recording. Alex Pretti did that. He stalked the agents. He stood in the road while unlawfully carrying a firearm. I'm not sure he unlawfully carried. Right? He then became physical, leading to a scuffle and him being shot dead. He has the right to carry at a protest. What he does not have the right to do is impede a federal operation, stand in traffic, interfere in an arrest, or put his hands on an officer. In every one of these clips, it's impossible to see what Pretti was doing with his hands. All that's clear is that the agitator and his friend were violently resisting arrest. The agitator had a gun on him. Everyone else was whistling loudly. Imagine being an ICE officer in this circumstance. You're trying to detain an illegal. Then you have an agitator assault you, so they need to be detained. Then another idiot agitator tries to de-arrest the first one, commits another assault, so he needs to be detained. Both of them are violently resisting. You can barely hear anything because the agitator's friends are blowing ear-piercing whistles, and then you hear gun, gun, gun from your colleagues. It's an impossible working environment. Using super loud whistles like this in the presence of law enforcement needs to be a federal crime. So I'm sympathetic to all these perspectives. And then this is chilling. 2 NYPD detectives were refused medical attention at New York University Hospital because the nurses and doctors thought they were ICE. Yeah, any medical professional doing this should have their license revoked. This is an abomination.
Policy agenda. So, again, the best outcome is forming an alliance or perhaps a political party. The intermediate outcome is if nobody successfully forms an alliance. And the worst outcome is if you're excluded from an alliance or if your preferred political party loses and gets disempowered. So this is what I think is the most interesting example of the simple majority game in action, the witch hunt game. So let's assume that we're all certain that one of us is a witch. We will keep making...
Nathan Kofnas had a funny remark on X. He was talking about the right is so low IQ that if it seizes power, you'll likely start executing witches. And then his comment got all these responses. What's wrong with executing witches? And a question in the chat, who is allied with Jews? Well, it depends on the circumstance. So I love the TV show The Pit, but its pious commitment to liberal ideals is a little nauseating at times. And so in the latest episode, you have this Jewish woman who was nearby the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh a few years ago, and she's being treated by a Muslim woman. And the Jewish woman said, oh, Muslims, they're great. They came to our aid after the shooting. They raised money for us. They marched for us. So in some circumstances, Jews and Muslims hate each other. Then in other circumstances, they will form an uneasy coalition. of the fringe against the core. So in some circumstances, gays will side with law enforcement and right-wing parties if that type of alliance will produce more safety, say, against Muslim threats to their safety. All right, let's get Michael back onto the show. Michael, what's going on, man?
40 boy, how are you?
I am blessed.
Cool. So I enjoyed your show last week on the Tucker Carlson topic, although I did feel you made some comments about, some creators that are obsessed with their metrics, and I felt targeted by those comments, targeted for who I am.
You feel unsafe?
Yes. You used language that targeted a specific group of people.
It's true. It's true. I am guilty.
Yeah. But anyway, what I want to hone in on is you were playing clips from the guy that's writing a book on Tucker, or he published a book on Tucker.
Yeah.
Referring to when Tucker was on Crossfire, when he had that little altercation with Jon Stewart in 2004. So why is that remembered in the collective memory that Jon Stewart destroyed Tucker Carlson? Did Jon Stewart destroy Tucker Carlson? Was that your take on it?
I've never thought deeply about it because it was just an insult fest, and I don't accord any epistemic value, but it is the overwhelming consensus of the chattering class that Jon Stewart destroyed Tucker Carlson there.
Right. It was an insult fest, but you might say that it has some relevance to the extent that it kind of changed the conventional wisdom about what is good kind of political content or good political media.
Yeah, it was epochal. It was a liminal space.
Yes. But when I see it, I think, if anything, I think Tucker destroyed Jon Stewart. Tucker really went in there with a scalpel, and he exposed the hypocrisy of Jon Stewart. He made fun of Jon Stewart because he said, you interviewed John Kerry and you were like his butt boy, I think is what he said. Yeah. And Jon Stewart was so triggered by that he just went straight to personal insult. And he said, well, you're as much of a dick on your show as you are everywhere else. Is that really such a witty takedown of Tucker Carlson?
It's hard for me to analyze insult fests and who really landed. It's just striking to me what an absolute elite consensus it was that Jon Stewart destroyed Tucker Carlson. It's not even, let's say one is convinced that one won an insult fest, but all your social circle is convinced that the other guy did, and all of the chattering class elites are convinced that the other person did. That would be a searing experience. So it wouldn't be hard for me to imagine that event changed Tucker Carlson, even if he was 100% convinced that he won.
Right. Okay. So here's from the Wikipedia entry on that confrontation. Let me just scroll to the relevant path. Okay. Apropos of what you just said, Carlson was dogged by the incident in subsequent years of his career, and some in the press speculate that humiliation from the incident motivated him to rise to prominence in cable news.
Right, and that rings true to me because I know that there are very few things more powerful than the desire to undo a humiliation and to wreak vengeance on your enemies.
And again, the idea that Jon Stewart destroyed Tucker Carlson, he said, "Oh, you're 35 and you wear a bow tie," and
I do think that's funny. I mean, yeah. I do think that's a zinger. It is strange to me for a 35-year-old man to wear a bow tie.
Okay, it's strange to me that he stopped wearing the bow tie. I think he needs to bring it back, first of all. And second of all, you remember when I mentioned to you that I had met George H.W. Bush's brother like 20 years ago? And
yeah,
he was the most aristocratic bearing, a noble WASP elite. And guess what he was wearing? A bow tie. And he was making it work. He was rocking a bow tie. So there's really nothing wrong with it. But
wait. Some people can rock a bow tie and other people can't. Is that fair?
Yes, absolutely. But Tucker Carlson has a great, I think, personal style. He's a good dresser. So there's really no blow was landed there.
Wait. Tucker stopped wearing a bow tie. So that seems to militate against what you said, because if that blow wasn't effective, he would have just kept on doing what he did. So Tucker changed,
yes,
it seems, in reaction to that.
In my opinion, it was the blow did not land. But yeah, apparently that's what I'm saying, is that he shouldn't. He wrongly took that to heart, and he should not have. But nonetheless, he still maintains an impressive personal style, I think.
Right, but let's go deeper on this. So have you experienced situations where you believe that you are 100% right, but everybody else disagrees with you? I'll give you an example. Everybody that has spoken to me about this believes that my critical writing about Dennis Prager was a profound betrayal of Dennis Prager, that it was just not a good thing to do. Nobody agrees with me that the value of my work exceeds the wrong of that betrayal. So even though every single person disagrees with me, I have continued to write on Dennis Prager, but it is unsettling when everybody disagrees with you. How have you navigated situations where you're 100% convinced that you're right, but everybody disagrees with you? There are times where I simply bow to that pressure, because that is an overwhelming pressure when everyone disagrees with you.
Well, first of all, I think you are a little harsh on Dennis Prager, but you give him his due, I think, sometimes. But as far as my experience, in, let's say, in real life, IRL, when I've been dumb enough to express my opinions, then they're not well received by the general, people just in my vicinity. But, then kind of becoming more of a content creator, it's there's actually a lot of people that agree with me. So for me, that's good feedback. Not to make it about me, but
here's another element. Comments only sting when I feel that they are true. So everyone condemning me for my writing about Dennis Prager and saying it's unfair and just inhuman to be this ungrateful, because I don't believe it's true, it doesn't rock me that much. It's when a criticism contains a great deal of truth that it stings. When a criticism contains, to me, no truth, it doesn't sting.
Yeah, of course. But getting back to the Jon Stewart, Tucker Carlson thing, so the show Crossfire, there's really nothing wrong with that show. The format, that was in existence in the early 2000s and 80s and the 90s of a political debate show, there's nothing inherently unhealthy to the public discourse about that.
Right. That depends on your perspective. So I think from an elite perspective, they have a great deal of concern about chaos. And so elites overwhelmingly favor far more speech restrictions than regular Americans. So for a regular American, the chaos in a Crossfire show is of no concern and consequence. But to elites, they overwhelmingly hate that type of chaos. Is that fair?
I don't know. Like I said, it was just kind of a normal. I just look at it more as just a vibe shift and just a way that of cable news in a way that it was just you had debate, you had Hannity and Combs, and then it was just Hannity. So if anything, what Jon Stewart did was he got rid of the format of two sides on equal footing kind of trading wits, and instead it's just you're kind of plugged into your side. So he came in with a very sanctimonious attitude, like he was on some higher moral principle. But if you look at what apparently that confrontation in 2004 ushered in, is just a more siloed media environment where you have smug bastards like Jon Stewart just kind of grinning at the camera and making stupid faces, is that better than Crossfire? Was that better than the way that like Meet the Press used to be? I don't think so.
Well, it depends on the perspective of the observer. If you control almost all of America's institutions, you want to reduce chaos. Your interests are aligned with more speech restriction. If your side does not control most of America's institutions, then you want more speech, and you are fine with more chaos because you want to overthrow the ruling elite. So having wide open speech favors the anti-elite, insurgent, populist side with which I am aligned, but I would understand why everyone on the elite left of center side would want speech restriction and less debate.
Yeah, but then you would have to explain why it was tolerated for so long until, again, that Stewart confrontation seemed to change the zeitgeist, which is that, I mean, I almost look at it in the view that, you know, debate is kind of a masculine endeavor, you might say. And if you look at, for example, the Sunday news shows like Meet the Press and Face the Nation, that they used to be very different. And it was just people having it out in debate. And now they'll still have putative Republicans on, but they're like, oh, they just happen to hate Trump and everything that Republicans are in favor of.
Right. So the dominant liberal elites do not like debate, and I will give them one thing. Debate is not a great tool for getting at truth. It is tremendously entertaining. So the liberal elite, by and large, did not like the John McLaughlin group, which was a big forerunner of debate fests. And so even though they would participate, the general inclination was a negative reaction. They preferred the PBS NPR style. And I think the Jon Stewart appearance crystallized elite opprobrium for debate fests. And so both sides of the political spectrum will use multiple approaches. So you did have liberals trying to launch their own form of talk radio. So even though liberals turned hard against talk radio when talk radio was taken over by the right, so they both formed their own talk radio, and they tried to stigmatize and regulate talk radio as much as possible. And liberal talk radio didn't take off, and so there just became an increasing consensus among the liberal elite that debates were just low class and bad form.
Yeah, I mean, that's you put it very nicely. But okay, so here's also from that Wikipedia entry. After the segment, Stewart went backstage with Begala to continue the conversation in a calmer manner. So why was he able to have a calm conversation with Begala, who was equally participating in this supposedly nefarious debate format show?
He didn't. Begala did not participate equally in the Jon Stewart confrontation. When Jon Stewart confronted Tucker, Begala backed off and didn't participate. Also, Stewart and Begala are on the same side, so of course it'd be easy for them to have a calm conversation.
Yeah, obviously, but I'm just saying that exposes the hypocrisy of it, because Stewart presumed to have some great moral point that he was putting across, and that's how it's remembered in the kind of public consciousness, is that he made some great moral point and destroyed Tucker Carlson. But as the point is that if he had a great moral point that it was the debate format itself which triggered him and it was partisan, well, Paul Begala was the other half of that, so he should have been just as angry at Paul Begala.
Right, but what Jon Stewart was doing was not making a moral point. He was making propaganda for his side, just like Tucker Carlson makes propaganda for his side. That what drives these type of opinions are not any moral principle, but it's a tactic in a competition between competing alliances for the coercive power of government.
Yeah, clearly it is. And so, I mean, we agree. So we agree that it was a hypocritical point and that it's misremembered by just kind of pop culture memory is totally misremembered, because if you watch it, if anything, I think Tucker Carlson had some more cutting points than Jon Stewart. He basically called him out for just being sanctimonious. He's like, I like you better on your show. You're more funny on your show. And here you're giving us a lecture. You should be a he said you should be a professor of journalism, which is to say that Stewart was kind of bloviating on the ethics of journalism, which is just very presumptuous because it's not like he's on a higher moral plane than Tucker Carlson.
And Stewart was playing against type, right? Nobody expected this. And so that's what made the move so brilliant, because nobody expected Jon Stewart to come in and start morally lecturing. And so when people play against type, that's what grabs attention. The reason that Tucker Carlson got so much attention for his evening monologues is you didn't know exactly what he was going to say. One night he would praise Elizabeth Warren. He was unexpected. So as opposed to Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham, Tucker Carlson would often play against type, just like Jon Stewart did there, because that's the way to get attention. If you are predictable, you do not grab attention. Jon Stewart played against type, and that's what made his move so brilliant at grabbing attention.
Yes, and that reminds me of another point that you made on your show, which was that Tucker Carlson was fired from Fox News for thinking too much. But on the other hand, it's like his job was to think. He was a commentator. So God forbid he did think and have opinions. So you can see the irony there.
Most employers only want you to think within bounds. And Tucker exceeded the bounds with which he was supposed to think.
But most jobs you're not supposed to give your opinion, and his job was to give his opinion.
Right, but he was only supposed to give his opinion within certain boundaries that were friendly to the corporation, and he was exceeding those boundaries. Right? If he started giving opinions that were consistently favoring the Democratic Party, Fox News would not have been happy.
No, you certainly can't. Even on a YouTube channel with 1,000 subscribers, you can't suddenly start saying things that are misinterpreted as supporting the Democrats. I can tell you personally. But
you can, but you have to pay a price. So everyone wants to be a hero. Everyone wants to be the brave truth teller, but almost nobody is willing to pay the price.
Yeah. And I don't say things that are supportive of the left pretty much ever, but I sometimes I'm satirical and it's misinterpreted. That's my only sin. But yeah, so Tucker was fired for thinking too much, and now you wouldn't really go to Fox News looking for thinking. That would not be the
I mean, and it would have been a mistake in first place because it is a lowbrow tabloid network. But when you say that you never say anything to support the left, the reason that we have these instincts that are labeled left-wing is because they have proved evolutionarily adaptive over the course of millennia. So there are always going to be situations where certain left-wing responses are more adaptive. We wouldn't have these impulses if they hadn't proved useful.
Yes. But yeah, so you wouldn't go to Fox News to get thinking these days. But that's, as you say, that's why Tucker was interesting, because he is an original thinker, and he's still quite freely giving his opinions, and it's still great content as far as I'm concerned. But you wouldn't go to Fox News now for that. Now you can hear Laura Ingraham saying things that sound based, and she's she might agree with people on the dissident right with a lot of things, but it's not like she's saying it with any particular style, or she's coming up with her own formulations that are impressive in their own way. I mean,
Tucker is a gifted writer. There's no one who is his peer in his ability to write on the Republican side of the political spectrum. I can't think of anyone else who is as effective a public speaker and a writer as Tucker Carlson. And I say that even though I don't like Tucker's trajectory since he left Fox.
Exactly. And you can even tell by someone as a public speaker, you can see that they're a good writer based on the way that they kind of just put their script together and the way they speak. Now, this is not to say that I'm anti-Fox News. I'm not at all. I'm glad it's out there, and they do investigative journalism. It can't just be all people just podcasting and making short videos. So everyone is kind of in their lane and it's all good, but they just don't really have a particularly compelling personality at the moment.
Right, because organizations don't like employing individuals who outshine the organization. And Tucker outshone Fox News, and I have this unfortunate tendency of I want to be the star, I want to be the hero, I want to be the focus of attention. And that's a really bad tendency for the employee. It's a very dangerous one.
Exactly, yeah. The only time that's really a good thing is if you're just a one-man show.
Yes. But
otherwise, yeah, I've learned to be extremely reticent in real life, because I'm just, if I can have an audience on Facebook or YouTube, then why do I waste my breath with people that, as you say, don't particularly want your opinion?
Yeah, and you have to understand things from the other person's point of view. I've never been in management for very long. So as a manager, you want as little friction as possible, right? You want as little service and trouble as possible. And when people start doing the unexpected, it creates friction. And so managers want an easy life. And the independent thinker is often someone who creates friction and just makes the operation of the business more costly. And that's why usually employers want employees who simply follow directions and check boxes and just do what they're told. And there are very few circumstances where they want employees who are independent thinkers.
Exactly. And you would be mistaken if you thought that people care about how smart you are. It's really not about that. And in fact, if anything, that kind of rubs people the wrong way. When in fact,
yes,
it's more important. It's better to just be compliant and kind of, as I say, reticent.
Agreeable. Yes.
Yeah. And I think I'm in danger of, I don't want to outshine Luke Ford on his own show. So maybe I'll take that as my cue, but,
before you, sorry, finish your thought.
Yeah.
Oh, are you looking forward to the new Tucker Carlson book?
Oh, so you're referring to the author that you were? Yeah, maybe I'll pick that up. But I found him to be extremely biased, and he was extremely ignorant of his own bias. But yeah, that could be an interesting book. I'd probably prefer that to a kind of hagiography, if I can actually learn something about Tucker's career. And he's talking about starting Daily Caller, which I used to work there, as you know, for a stint. So that would be
because there was a Tucker Carlson biography that was very pro Tucker, and almost nobody bought it.
Yeah, because that's why I'm almost. It's kind of like we both like Michael Wolff, because I'd rather get some inside info and a critical perspective. I don't want like a virulent leftist who's just their vitriol is all over the book. But if it's someone who's just going to be dispassionate and kind of uncover the facts, maybe I will buy that book, and then we can chat about it.
Yeah, the pro Tucker biography is just called Tucker, and it's by Chadwick Moore, who would appear on Tucker's show. But it's interesting that nobody bought it.
Yeah, because these kind of basic bitch conservative commentators are not going to be good writers. So, right.
Okay, mate. Good to catch up with you.
All right. Take care.
Okay. Cheers, mate. See ya. Okay.
Making and denying allegations until one of us is found guilty. Guilty just means that two players agree that the third player is the witch. The third player doesn't actually have to be a witch. At the start of the game, we each have a 1/3 chance of being found guilty. So here we are at the start of the game with a cloud of suspicion hanging over our heads in the form of -1/3 C. And here is what happens if you and I form an alliance against Bob and accuse him of witchcraft.
Okay, a question in the chat. Why do Jews use the term Hellenized Jew in a negative way? Okay, so Hellenized Jew refers to Jews who were heavily assimilated to the Hellenized approach to life. Now, the only reason that there are still Jews around in the world, even though Jews have lived in the diaspora as a minority for approximately 2,500 years, is that Jewish life had a perspective that that which is Jewish is awesome and that which is not Jewish is inferior to that which is Jewish. And that's the only way any strongly identifying in-group will perpetuate itself. If taking on the outlook and characteristics and practices of the dominant majority is the best way to go, then you're just going to assimilate. So you only can maintain a tribe if the tribe venerates the tribal approach to life and not the outsider approach to life. So there is no rule of heaven that Jews must put their Jewish identity or Jewish practice first. So for some Jews and for some Christians, being an American is more important than being Jewish or being a Christian. There is a civic religion in the United States that being courteous and polite is more important than the ultimate truth claims of your religion. So it feels un-American to most people to stand up for the ultimate distinctive truth claim of your particular religion. So the more intense your in-group identity, right, the more likely you are to rub outsiders the wrong way. So if you're living in a multicultural area or working in a multicultural workplace, if you display an intense in-group identity, for example, you walk around with a yarmulke, that's going to likely rub people the wrong way. You are going to be less likely to be hired, even by Jewish employers, if you wear a yarmulke, because it signals an intense commitment to an in-group identity, someone who's willing to pay a big price to make a signal of their commitment to an in-group identity. Now, for some Christians, socialism is more important to them than their Christianity. For some Jews, socialism is more important to them than their Judaism. For some Jews and Christians, their national identity as American or English or French or German is more important to them than their tribal or religious identity. So for some people, their most important identity is their profession. They're a doctor, they're a lawyer, they're an accountant. So there are many forms of identity. The more intense your tribal or racial identity, the more likely you are to rub outsiders the wrong way. If you insist on the distinctive ultimate truth claims of your religion, right, that's not going to be a popular approach to life, right? Other people in the United States in particular are going to find that un-American that you really believe in the ultimate truth claims of your religion.
So again, we have a simple majority game. And what's interesting about the witch hunt game is that the best outcome is actually 0. But it still counts as a simple majority game because the 3 outcomes are ranked in the right order. So let's talk about evolutionarily stable strategies.
I'm not sure if I've ever watched listened to the Rest Is History podcast. I'm a big fan of David Starkey. We don't know that COVID came out of a lab leak, right? That's the popular belief, but among virologists, very few virologists side with it.
In evolutionary game theory, an evolutionarily stable strategy is a strategy that is selected for relative to alternative strategies, or to an alternative strategy. We not only want to know how the strategy performs, we want to know how it performs when it's rare and when it's common. Why? Because in evolution, when strategies perform well, they become more common. They proliferate. And that proliferation changes the strategic landscape. If a strategy performs well when it's rare and increases in frequency, we say it invades the population. If a strategy invades when it's rare and it resists invasion when it's common, we say it is an evolutionarily stable strategy, or an ESS. So now that we know what that is, we can ask the question, is it an ESS?
So I've become a big devotee of this bloke over the past few months, and I haven't found any examples where he's biased. He is a truth optimizer. He is an excellent model of a truth optimizer.
ESS to form alliances. It would be nice if the answer was no. This is all rather unpleasant stuff, isn't it? Ganging up on others to take their stuff.
And his blog is called Everything is Bullshit. Not I don't like to use profanity, and so I revolt against that title and that concept. But the quality of the work is so good that it forced me to overcome my revulsion.
Siding against them in conflicts, burning them at the stake, it's not nice. Has evolution doomed us to a life of alliances?
Yes. That's the short answer. Evolution has doomed us to a life of alliances. That's the nature of reality. And as it says in the Talmud, the signature of God is truth. And even if you don't like a truth, if it's true, you should recognize it and treat it essentially as holy. The New Yorker Radio Hour, latest edition, focuses on how Tucker Carlson became the prophet of MAGA. Short answer is Tucker followed incentives. He looked at the metrics, and he looked at where the puck was going, and he went there. Very classy.
When Tucker Carlson was fired from Fox News in 2023, he had the largest program on cable news. By far, Carlson could draw around 3 million viewers on a given night, way, way ahead of MSNBC and CNN. After Fox, Carlson brought a new show to YouTube, and his reach has grown. Some of his shows have as many as 7 million views. Carlson has been...
So, if you were to ask AI, I don't think AI would agree that Tucker's reach has grown, but his connection with his audience has become more intense. So I would wager that his reach has diminished, but the intensity of that connection has increased.
A standard bearer for the right. Many of us know about the racist conspiracy theory known as the Great Replacement only because of Tucker Carlson. He's quite sympathetic to Vladimir Putin, too. He also celebrated Trump's threats to seize Greenland by force, not because he cares about Greenland, but because that would have wrecked the NATO alliance.
So if circumstances change, right, Tucker Carlson's going to change. When incentives change, Tucker will change. Right now, the incentives for Tucker to develop his intense bond with his audience is to be Israel skeptical. But if circumstances change, right, Tucker will become pro-Israel.
And yet, Carlson doesn't always stick to the MAGA party line. He called the shooting of Renee Good by an ICE agent in Minneapolis a tragedy. And he pointed out that the way people in MAGA were making light of it, that was exactly what they had condemned after the shooting of Charlie Kirk. Few people have thought more about Tucker Carlson in recent years than Jason Zengerle, who recently joined The New Yorker as a staff writer. Zengerle's new book is called Hated by All the Right People. And when Zengerle was first coming up as a political journalist, Tucker Carlson was
Notice that there's a different way that talking heads on the right and left speak. So the left have this NPR type of voice, while right-wing commentators are incredibly campy. Think Bill Buckley or Larry O'Connor.
Someone he kind of admired. Let's start at the beginning. How did you first meet?
Once you recognize the power of the situation, you can admire people for some things and loathe them for others. Right? In some situations, you can really enjoy someone. Right? There are some people, if you talk to them every day, you'll grow to hate them. But if you only talk to them every few weeks, right, you will treasure them.
Tucker Carlson, what was your relationship, and what was he like then as opposed to now?
So I first met Tucker Carlson when I was an intern at the New Republic, and Tucker was working at the Weekly Standard, which was kind of the conservative analog to the New Republic. These are two, small circulation political magazines in Washington that, I would say punched above their weight in terms of influence. And Tucker was only a few years older than me, but he was already, light years ahead of my own career, extremely well established. He was the hot young writer in Washington. So this was in the late 1990s, I think 1990.
So how did Tucker become so successful so young? He followed the incentives. He told the people in power what they wanted to hear. Right? He greased the wheels for his career trajectory, and then he kept following incentives and kept paying attention to metrics.
97. And Tucker would come to have lunch with another hotshot young writer in town who worked at the New Republic named Steve Glass. And while he waited sometimes for Steve to come out of his office, he would entertain the interns. And he was extremely affable.
Stephen Glass at the New Republic also followed incentives to create very exciting stories. And in the course of creating these exciting stories, he made a whole bunch of things up, which was a cardinal sin among his crowd, and so he lost all support from his crowd and he became a pariah.
Extremely funny. He would tell great stories, kind of give us a peek of the stuff that was going on that, we suspected was going on Capitol Hill, but we didn't know ourselves. And he was someone we all looked up to and, admired. I think we respected his work.
Why did you guys admire him?
I admired his journalism. I thought he was a really talented writer and a pretty brave reporter.
I really enjoy Larry O'Connor. I find him compelling. I pretty much agree with him about everything. I'm absolutely fine with him as a replacement for Sean Spicer.
He was willing to take on sacred cows.
I'm a big Dan Turrentine fan, right? Dan Turrentine is my favorite Democrat. I just find it easier to hear the Democratic Party perspective from Dan Turrentine than anyone else of which I'm aware. And it's not easy as a rabid Republican for me to hear the other side. So props to Dan for the way he's able to present his opinions.
Was in the conservative movement. I mean, he wrote a profile of George W. Bush when Bush was still governor of Texas, was the, presumed front runner in the presidential race. And Tucker wrote this, subtly kind of devastating profile that showed Bush to be callow and kind of stupid and stubborn and all these things that, if you paid attention would have revealed Bush, all the things that made him kind of a bad president.
Jason, this is a book about Tucker Carlson. It's also about the rise of partisan media, which has become such a powerful presence in our lives. And it seems that in your view, Tucker Carlson predicted some changes in the media before his peers did. Tell me about that a little bit.
Tucker's always been very good about seeing where things are going. He kind of skates, to where the puck is going to be. And I think that, he first did that when he left print journalism. I think he recognized maybe before some other people like myself that, if he wanted to, attain the fame and fortune and power that he clearly did, he was not going to be able to do that in print. So, he left his job as a pretty promising young magazine writer and moved into cable news.
And Tucker Carlson cut his teeth, really, as a journalist at the Weekly Standard, which was a conservative magazine. Where did he stand on that staff? In other words, was he particularly conservative? Were there signs of what he became early on?
Not really. He was actually kind of one of the more non-ideological members of the staff. He was more of a journalist, of a reporter than an ideologue. I mean, it was a real powerhouse staff. I mean, you had, Bill Kristol, David Brooks, Charles Krauthammer, and Tucker was the guy who was kind of more interested in storytelling.
So almost all my peers have excelled me. Virtually everyone in my social circle is far, far more successful than I am. So do I learn from them? Do I say to myself, 40, what can I learn from all these other people who are more successfully navigating life? No. I tell myself, they're careerists. They make all sorts of moral compromises that I never would. I optimize for truth. I am a brave truth teller. Yeah, I'm a failure in this area and that area, but at least I see through the BS.
In 2000, he at one point was the youngest anchor in CNN's history with.
So I like the new Sean Spicer, Dan Turrentine show. I don't switch usually between the DC Huddle and the 2A morning show. Usually I listen to the DC Huddle all the way through, and then I'll listen to the 2A morning show. I'm just a huge Mark Halperin fan. But I don't think right now I have any preference between the DC Huddle and the 2A morning show. I find them of equal quality.
A program that was then called the Spin Room. From your perspective, does it seem like he thought of himself as part of mainstream media at this time, or was he starting to kind of separate himself out into some other realm?
No, he was absolutely part of mainstream media and absolutely a member of the Washington political and.
So one good thing about modern life is that there are so many ways that you can feel important. So let's say you're unimportant at work, you're not particularly important in your family or your community, but you're a hero with regard to playing video games, you're a hero with regard to certain volunteering capacity, you're a hero with regard to stamp collecting or whatever. I think we all want to be heroes, and so we all look for places where we can excel, and it's not easy to be a hero at work. And so we look around. Oh, maybe I should volunteer here, or I should join this club or that group or do this activity. Everyone wants to be a hero. Nobody wants to pay the price.
Media establishment, one of its youngest members, but certainly a member. He was friends with all of the various anchors and swells. He was good buddies with the people on the Hill. He considered himself kind of a key cog in that ecosystem. I mean, Tucker actually had a show on PBS for 2 years. Tucker Carlson Unfiltered. So he was not at all like the person he is today.
Just imagine Tucker Carlson with a show on PBS. It is kind of mind-boggling. Discrimination is a really, really bad thing, but reality constantly discriminates. For example, female basketball players are 3.5 times as likely as their male counterparts as to have an ACL incident. In soccer, they're 3 times as likely as men. So all sorts of parts of life discriminate against men. Women discriminate against different groups. Medications often work differently on different races. Women have various musculoskeletal issues that men don't have. So you can say all sorts of beautiful, compelling words about the evils of discrimination, but in the final analysis, reality wins, and those who are at war with reality, they're going to lose.
So a really formative event in the reputation of Tucker Carlson and probably in his own psyche, although God knows I'm no shrink and even as a biographer you aren't either. But in 2004 on Crossfire, Jon Stewart joined the show as a guest, creating one of the first really viral video moments ever. Let's take a listen.
I think you're a good comedian. I think your lectures are boring. Let me ask you a question on the news.
Now, this is theater. I mean, it's obvious. How old are you?
35.
And you wear a bow tie.
Yeah, I do. I do.
So this is...
No, I know. You're right. No, let me just go. No, come on.
And listen, I'm not suggesting that you're not a smart guy, because those are not easy to tie. But the thing is that you're doing theater when you should be doing debate, which would be great.
No, it's
not honest. What you do is not honest. What you do is partisan hackery.
What impact did that have on Tucker Carlson, that moment? Because I remember it pretty well.
Yeah, I don't know if Tucker Carlson is the person he is today without that moment. I mean, that was such a humiliating experience for him. He was completely blindsided by it. He thought he was friendly with Stewart, because I think Jon Stewart used to go on Larry King at the CNN studios when Tucker was waiting around to do the spin room, and he would take smoke breaks outside and Tucker would join him, and he thought they were buddies. And I think everybody at Crossfire thought that it was going to be a fun episode. They thought Stewart was in on the joke, basically, that it was all going to be kind of pretend, theater, and it wasn't serious. And it's really funny when you watch that episode. Paul Vigala, who was the chair on the left, he just kind of shuts up and just lets Stewart go. And Tucker's the only one kind of engaging him, and that's why Stewart went after him that way.
So what was the impact on Carlson?
Well, a few months later, a new president of CNN took over and canceled Crossfire altogether and let Tucker's contract expire. And basically explained to the New York Times at the time that I agree with Jon Stewart. I think he was right. And it was a humiliation for Tucker.
I remember that Jon Stewart Tucker Carlson episode, and it just became crystallized overwhelmingly. The elite consensus was that Jon Stewart had humiliated Tucker Carlson, and Jon Stewart had ended debate shows on cable TV news. Because that kind of wide open conversation is way too dangerous for people in power. So if you don't have power, you are strongly incentivized to prefer chaos and wide open speech. When you have power, you want to reduce chaos and you want to reduce freedom of speech. Those are the incentives. So how did Donald Trump win 2 out of 3 presidential elections? Because he managed his shifting coalition alliances. Right? He didn't win because of abstract principles. He won because he redefined who counted as the Republican Party's core coalition. Right? He united non-elite working class voters, both white and non-white, cultural conservatives, security and border control conservatives, Christian evangelicals, and anti-establishment elites. So he reattached groups that were previously peripheral to the core of the Republican coalition. by creating a new enemy set, the elites, the globalists, the Washington insiders. And this realignment of the coalition created transitivity across disparate factions, meaning that it was a connection that transitivity is such a difficult thing to define. So it refers to a relationship that transfers across elements, across groups. And the coalition coalesced around Donald Trump. He said to them, "I am your voice," and enough people agreed with him, and they carried him to victory. Then in 2018 and in 2020, his coalition lost transitivity. So the broader alliance that brought him to power in 2016 fractured under stress. So some of his previous allies, particularly suburban voters, shifted against Trump by about 2% in 2018-2020 election. College-educated moderates, minority voters, right, pulled away or mobilized against him. So he kept an intense base, but the opposing coalition of moderates, progressives, and non-aligned voters reconfigured itself around Joe Biden. So that rival coalition formed a stronger, more stable, more transitive alliance than his own, so Trump lost the election. So when two alliances compete, the one with a broader, more stable base tends to win. So in 2020, Trump's coalition was intense but narrow. The rival coalition was broader, more cohesive, and less intense. No one was excited about Joe Biden. Trump won in 2024 because he rebuilt his alliance into a dominant governing bloc. Right? He restored his coalition in a way that restored transitivity and broadened its reach. So he re-engaged with working class voters. He expanded his appeal among Hispanic and black men in particular. He retained his strong support among white non-college voters and cultural conservatives. And he capitalized on voters dissatisfied with the economy, immigration, and national leadership. So he reassembled a coalition that combined strong base of cultural and economic populists, frustrated swing voters who agreed more with Trump than with the Democrats about immigration and the economy, and some previously alienated groups, such as black men and Hispanic men, saw him as less threatening than the Democrats. To rebuild his transitivity and interdependence across these factions, giving him the majority coalition needed to win both the Electoral College and the popular vote. So Trump's wins are not about the consistency of his ideas. Trump is constantly contradicting himself. Right? Trump wins politics because he assembles winning coalitions. He creates incentives for different social groups to see each other as allies, and he defines a shared set of enemies. So in 2016, he was a disruptive alliance builder who united disparate factions. In 2020, his alliance lost cohesion. In 2024, he rebuilt and stabilized a broader, dominant coalition.
And I think that it created in him kind of a bitterness and a resentment, because I think a lot of the people that he considered his friends and supporters, you know, people in that kind of DC political media establishment, they didn't come.
And the chat says, look, it's not as if anything you say matters. Correct, which is so freeing.
To his defense. I mean, maybe privately they did, but publicly they didn't. And I think the resentment that he feels today towards, you know, what he calls legacy media or corporate media, I think a lot of it starts right there.
Something else happened really interesting that seems formative to me in 2000.
Is there anything that's more strengthening, hardening, and energizing than resentment? I mean, it's a fuel, powerful fuel, often a toxic fuel, but if harnessed correctly, what power comes from it?
2009. He went to CPAC, which is the big conservative gathering of the year, and he rebuked them. Let's listen to that.
If you create a news organization whose primary objective is not to deliver accurate news, you will fail. You will fail. The New York Times is a liberal paper, but it's also, and it is to its core a liberal paper, it's also a paper that cares about whether they spell people's names right. By and large. It's a paper that actually cares about accuracy. Conservatives need to build institutions that mirror those institutions. That's the truth. You don't believe me? The New York Times? You don't think? Why isn't there a is what? Well, but I'm not saying they're not. I'm merely saying that at the core of their news gathering operation is gathering news. And and conservatives need to do the same. Yes, they are.
So what is he foretelling there?
So at the time he gave that speech, he had just been fired from MSNBC.
So a lot of bravery in Tucker Carlson to give a speech like that was not going to go over well. So what are Trump's future prospects, right? It depends on whether he can maintain his coalition and its transitivity, meaning a relationship between the various members of his coalition. Are they willing to work together and help each other? So if his alliance fractures, if rival coalitions reorganize more strongly, Trump's margin of victory might shrink or reverse. But if he keeps his core factions aligned around shared enemies and shared interests, then he remains the central coordinator of a powerful alliance. So when the different members of your alliance see that they have an interest in supporting each other, that is powerful. Now, let's think about Marco Rubio's trajectory, right? Marco Rubio has a career as the man who repeatedly aligned with the wrong coalition at the wrong moment. But he survived by constantly changing and repositioning himself as someone willing to play second fiddle, and he has become a durable node inside a shifting alliance structure, right? He emerged out of the post-Bush Republican super alliance of neocon foreign policy elites, pro-business, globalists, evangelicals, Tea Party fiscal conservatives, and Cuban-American anti-communists. That was his bridging coalition. Security hawks, free market elites, religious conservatives, held together by their shared enemies, socialism, Iran, Russia, domestic liberalism. So he had a biography and a rhetoric that perfectly signaled his similarity with this coalition. Right? He was a son of immigrants, he was anti-Castro, he was Christian, he was free market, interventionist overseas, rhetorically idealistic. He was groomed as a coordinator for this old order. Then the alliance structure shifted. Donald Trump revealed a new alliance structure. Rubio, like Jeb Bush, found himself allied with institutions that rising parts of the Republican bloc now defined as enemies.
And he was plotting to launch a website that eventually was called the Daily Caller. And his original vision for the Daily Caller was kind of a conservative analog to the Huffington Post. I mean, maybe the Huffington Post more than the New York Times, but if you remember at the time, the Huffington Post was the hot website, and Tucker thought that there was a space for this on the right. And he was working at that time to sort of gin up money for it, but also interest.
So Robert says in the chat that, what does he say? That Israel is making it extremely unsafe for him to live in the West. So why would someone say something so incendiary, right? So apparently removed from reality, because it signals to your tribe that you're willing to burn all bridges to polite society. So that high intensity commitment, right, will meet a receptive audience with others who are similarly intense and willing to burn all bridges to polite society.
And I think he was looking for sort of young conservative writers and reporters who were not just...
And Robert says, I've been looking for a safe place to move to, but it's always the same story. Well, maybe lack of safety isn't outside of you. Maybe it's in your internal predisposition.
Kind of pundits or talking heads or ideologues, but who had a dedication to finding out facts. And that was like, he went to give that speech at CPAC. I mean, he knew what he was going to get there. He knew he was going to get booed, but he thought that the negative reaction would appeal to these serious young conservatives and young conservative journalists, and also appeal to sort of the DC, media elite, who he was still a member in good standing in that group. But, I think he was trying to almost sort of say, look, I went into the wilderness on TV for a little while. I'm coming back as a prodigal son. I'm rededicating myself to, serious journalism, facts, things like that. And here I am. And he got a fantastic reception. I mean, that's
right. He wanted to create the Daily Caller as a conservative version of the New York Times. That was his initial desire. So Rubio finds that the Republican Party has shifted. And this resulted in his humiliation and in his status loss. His allies collapsed, and his moral language collapsed with them. So Rubio's 2016 defeat in the Republican primary was not about his debate skills. It was about transitivity failure. There was not a connection between the various members of his coalition that created a path to power. So he saw allies and donors, think tanks, neocons, media, and he eventually recognized that they were no longer trusted by the new dominant faction of the Republican Party, and he realized that he was cognitively sorted into the wrong camp, so he adapted. So unlike Richard Spencer or other ideological purists, Right, Marco Rubio did something that alliance theories predicts that successful survivors will do. He realigned rather than doubled down on losing allies. So he did not try to become a charismatic populist, did not try to out-Trump Trump. Said he shifted his loyalty to the new MAGA nationalist coalition. So now his enemy set changed. China became the new enemy. Big tech became the enemy. The State Department became suspect. Cultural conservatism hardened. So his beliefs changed after his alliance commitments changed. Then he stabilized. He now occupies a safe but subordinate structural role. He is trusted by the national security bureaucracy. He is acceptable to MAGA voters. He is acceptable to donors. He is useful to MAGA and to party leadership, and he is not threatening to Trump. So he is successful as a bridging functionary. He's not leading the coalition, but he is translating between the elite and the masses, right? He is reducing friction between these two polar opposites. He's providing continuity, and he's protected because he's useful and he's not dangerous. He's no longer humiliated, and he's no longer exalted. He has found a stable niche in the alliance network. Now, what are his future prospects? It's hard to be optimistic about Marco Rubio becoming the focal leader of the Republican super alliance, right? He lacks any kind of mythic status with the base. He doesn't have that personal dominance charisma, doesn't have founder energy in the new coalition, and he doesn't have a unique factional army. So coalitions tend to elevate people who symbolize the group or who can successfully coordinate rival subgroups. Marco Rubio does neither. He is a competent operator, but he's not a totem. But he's likely to remain highly viable as a Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, Vice President, a Senate leader, and an establishment bridge in a post-Trump transition. So if MAGA stabilizes into a governing order, Rubio becomes one of its elders. If MAGA fractures, Rubio will have to reposition again, but his ceiling is institutional, not charismatic. So Rubio misread the first great realignment, paid the price, adapted, and survived. He's no longer trying to lead the tribe. He's trying to remain indispensable to whichever tribe is winning.
That's, I think it's hard to imagine now, but the people in Washington, the people he now attacks, I mean, they embraced him and they supported him, and he got all sorts of help and advice from, people at Politico and people at CNN and all these other institutions that wanted him to succeed.
I'm speaking with Jason Zengerle.
Works for rewards at joinbuilt.com.
We share the kind of stories
just minorities, thus transforming the United States. I've been speaking today with Jason Zengerle, whose new book about Tucker Carlson is called...
So just listening to the way David Remnick, the editor of The New Yorker, speaks, you immediately know he's on the left. Right? There are left-wing and right-wing ways of speaking.
Hated by all the right people. Zengerle traces Carlson's path from being a puckish, right-leaning contrarian. He spent time hosting on CNN and even MSNBC.
Another thing that I pick up from David Remnick's voice, it is the assurance of power. Right? He is at the top of his particular niche. And have you heard of something called a status transaction? So conversations often tend to become status transactions where one person is recognized as being in a superior status than the other. Someone in a higher status speaks more smoothly. They don't move their head as much. They are less herky-jerky. They are less eager and chaotic. And people with lower status, right, they tend to have all the opposite qualities. So David Remnick speaks in that smooth, assured way that you would expect with someone with his power.
And then moved toward the far right. After he lost his show on MSNBC, Carlson saw an opportunity to start something online where he could do a brand of journalism that was unconstrained by editors and bosses. It was a news and opinion website called The Daily Caller. So he goes and co-founds The Daily Caller, but that begins to take an extremist drift, at least to my ear. There were pieces that you referred to in your book that were published in the wake of Trayvon Martin's murder. What happened there?
Well, Tucker, I think, very quickly realized that this vision he had for this, fact-based conservative publication was not going to get any traffic. And there was no audience for it. So he very quickly pivoted.
So wonderful intentions are one thing, but once you recognize that there is no business model for your intentions, if you have to stay viable, you're going to have to find a new direction. So let's use and apply alliance theory to the rise and fall of Richard Spencer. And you can see that entirely in terms of failed coalition building. So he tried to found a new super alliance: white identitarians, disaffected young men, race realists, paleo-conservatives, anti-liberal intellectuals, and anti-globalist populists. And so the Trump movement created a temporary transitivity, a connection among these groups. They had shared enemies: the liberal elites, mass immigration, multicultural ideology, legacy media. So for a brief window, the enemy of my enemy logic made them appear like one emerging bloc. Richard Spencer's mistake was confusing temporary coordination with a durable alliance. So coalitions stabilize only when three conditions hold: similarity, transitivity, interdependence. And Spencer's coalition failed all three. So the populists right with ethno-nationalists only in the loosest, most symbolic sense. Most supporters cared about borders, status loss, cultural humiliation, elite betrayal, not about biological race theory. So Spencer's core doctrine was too narrow and too abstract to serve as a mass coordination tag. So Spencer's emphasis was that race matters, race is the core to identity, and most people don't feel that way. Transitivity. So the wider right did not share Richard Spencer's enemy map. So Christian evangelical, Zionist, libertarians, working class nationalists did not see Jews, Israel, interracial marriage, or democracy itself as the enemy. So when forced to choose, they sided with their existing allies against Richard Spencer. So he failed the transitivity test. He failed the interdependence test. So Richard Spencer's movement offered no material, institutional, or protective benefits to anyone. No jobs, no churches, no unions, no media platforms, no electoral machinery, no legal defense network. So alliance psychology abandons leaders who cannot provide an advantage. Trump reconfigured the alliance structure. The new dominant coalition became nationalist but civic nationalist, populist but not racist, anti-elite but pro-Israel, anti-woke but not anti-democracy. And Spencer found himself misaligned with both sides. He was too radical for the right, and he was too right for the liberal order. He had no stable ally set left. His allies evaporated, and then the psychological pattern that alliance theory predicts kicked in. Loss of moral certainty, fragmentation of narrative, status collapse, bitter resignaling, attempts to defect or invert loyalties. So when Richard Spencer falls in status, he starts zigzagging with his ideology, with his Ukraine stance, with anti-Trump positions and rhetorical nihilism. It looks less and less like he's undergoing any kind of principled evolution, and more like a stranded coalition entrepreneur searching for a new alliance niche that never materializes. So Richard Spencer's trajectory is not the story of a great intellectual who was refuted. It's the story of a leader whose proposed coalition failed to achieve scale, stability, and transitivity, and lost the social oxygen that sustains ideological confidence. So beliefs did not collapse first. Alliances collapsed first. Then the beliefs followed.
And he, most of the original reporters he hired left, and he brought in a new crop of reporters. And these men and women were really pretty far out there ideologically. And at the same time that this is going on, Breitbart is kind of coming onto the scene, and Breitbart's having a lot of success with this really kind of inflammatory, pretty much racist coverage of black on white crime. That was kind of this obsession that Breitbart had. And the Daily Caller mimicked that. And the Trayvon Martin shooting, the Daily Caller really went.
So obsession is a clue that someone's trying to put someone down, right? So if people are interested in a topic that's important, you don't call them obsessed, right? You only use a language like obsession as a put down to signal that whoever you're talking about is bad.
And all in on trying to besmirch Martin's reputation, basically, and portray him as, a thug or a hothead or violent.
So the discovery is that extremism sells.
Yes. He is looking at the web traffic. He's looking at the metrics, and he's recognizing that what the conservative base wants is racism, sexism, nativism, all these things that, the Republican establishment hasn't really figured out yet, but Tucker's figuring it out while he's running the Caller.
In November 2016, the program Tucker Carlson Tonight on Fox premieres. Here's a promo clip for the show.
What's the show going to be about? You can judge for yourself, but here's the basic theme of it. People in power tend to lie, not because they want to, but because they can't help themselves. That's human nature. The more power people have, the bigger the temptation to misuse it. The press is supposed to be the watchdog against all of this, and it worked fine for a couple of centuries. Then the press decided they had more in common with certain politicians than with readers or viewers, and that's when it fell apart. We're going to get back to basics here. We're going to hold the powerful accountable, pierce pomposity, translate doublespeak, mock smugness, and barbecue nonsense every night. Hope you'll watch.
So Richard Spencer made biological race theory the center of his agenda, and this was just way too narrow an agenda for people on the right overall. So the Trump movement created temporary transitivity through shared enemies like liberal elites and legacy media, but the wider right prioritized all sorts of cultural and religious issues over Richard Spencer's abstract racialism. So his doctrine failed to serve as a focal point for common knowledge, so it could not generate a durable alliance. When your map of enemies, right, does not align with a broader group, you are not going to get a great deal of political success. So individuals will usually adopt their allies' social preferences. Richard Spencer's mistake was assuming the broader right would adopt his enemies, his hatreds of democracy and Jews. So when forced to choose, established groups such as Zionists and working-class nationalists practiced exclusionary closure against people like Richard Spencer. They viewed Spencer as toxic because his presence imposed such a huge net fitness cost, right? Specifically a reputational and social cost on their own coalition. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with Richard. He also demonstrated a lack of interdependence. Alliances stabilize when various members of the alliance reliably provide benefits to each other, such as protection, resources, and status. So Spencer offered no institutional or material advantage, and people are going to abandon leaders who cannot provide a benefit. So his supporters quickly defected once the excitement of the 2016 cycle gave way to the reality of humiliation, status loss, and legal pressure.
Now, of course, this is just days in the wake of the election of Donald Trump. To what extent did Tucker Carlson hold power and the President of the United States to account?
I don't think he held power and the President of the United States to account. I mean, if you considered power at the time, fairly obscure liberal academics or activists or journalists, he did a fantastic job of holding those people to account, because those were the guests he had on, and those were the people that he barbecued. And, in the early days of the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, Tucker really made kind of a name for himself and got viewers by just humiliating his guests. I mean, he would find these debate partners who, just couldn't sort of hold a candle to him, and he would put them in these studios. They weren't in the studio with him, so they were kind of, their face was framed against him in these two boxes, and he could control the debate. It wasn't like Jon Stewart. Jon Stewart was there. He could sort of call Tucker a dick, and they couldn't do anything about it.
Right.
So Richard Spencer's coalition fell apart, and with it, his beliefs fell apart. And this is alliance theory, right? Your alliance structure will predict your moral values, will predict your favored narrative. So his alliances evaporated. He lost status. He lost the social oxygen required to keep pushing his agenda. And then he went on all these ideological zigzags, right, to try to create new allies, and it just has never worked. So he's a failed leader who was neutralized and rejected by both the left and the right. And in politics, loyalty is the honest signal of reasoning, right? Without a coalition to be loyal to, your reasoning tends to become nihilistic because it no longer serves a strategic function. Right? If your beliefs, if your propaganda, if your agenda doesn't provide sustenance to a particular coalition, then you're not going to get any support for it, and you'll likely cease to believe it.
If anyone tried to call Tucker a dick in this instance, they would just cut the feed. So he, it was a completely unfair fight. And those were the people he was punching. He was punching down and he was punching left.
And what was his relationship with Trump about?
He had a complicated relationship with Trump. He was, unlike a lot of the other Fox anchors, he was wary of Trump personally, and he was keeping his distance. He was, I think, alarmed that Trump watched his show and watched so much cable television.
That is funny. It is kind of alarming how much TV Trump wants. So who would have thought that Nick Fuentes would prove more durable and influential than Richard Spencer? So Fuentes is not primarily an ideologue. He is a coalition engineer, and he's trying to carve out a niche inside a collapsing and recombining right-wing alliance system. So his starting position was inside MAGA. Right, he appealed to Trump voters, online dissidents, young males who are experiencing decline in status, anti-woke cultural warriors, and nationalists. So he had a broad coalition, emotionally unified and bound by shared enemies, liberal elites, legacy media, big tech, national security state, and progressive control of institutions. But there was an unresolved internal hierarchy problem, like who would define the moral center of the Nick Fuentes movement? Would it be Christian evangelicals, civic nationalists, libertarians, Jews, ethno-nationalists, Catholics? So he's trying to push a particular subgroup to the top of the status stack by redefining who the real in-group is. So when coalitions become large, you have an internal rivalry replacing external rivalry. And then you have faction leaders like Fuentes who try to redraw alliance boundaries to elevate their sub-clique and demote rivals. So Fuentes' strategy has 3 alliance factions, right? Purification, trying to shrink the in-group so that loyalty becomes more intense and the hierarchy more clear. Civic nationalism becomes fake. Conservative and American nationalist Jews are suspect. Israel is a wedge issue. Mainstream Republicans are traitors. So he's narrowing his alliance, reducing similarity requirements, raising commitment costs, leaving polite society and creating sharper friend-enemy distinctions. He engages in status inversion. So groups that had prestige in the broader right coalition, such as Fox News, conservatives, donors, Zionists, institutional Republicans, they are now described by Fuentes as morally corrupt and cowardly. Marginal young men, online radicals, and religious hardliners are elevated as the true defenders of civilization. So he's trying to reorder rank inside his alliance. Third, he engages in competitive victimhood. He relentlessly frames his faction as uniquely victimized and persecuted, deplatformed, surveilled, silenced, betrayed by conservatives as much as by liberals. So victim narrative has mobilized loyalty, justifies radical tactics, and creates moral insulation against criticism. So his fixation on Jews in Israel is not primarily theological or racial, right? It is alliance structural. And the same thing with Tucker Carlson. So in the current American right, in MAGA, Jews and pro-Israel networks occupy high transitivity positions. They connect Christian evangelicals, donors, neocons, populists. To challenge this coalition's hierarchy, you have to attack its most central bridging node. That forces a sorting process. Who is really with us? So Fuentes keeps getting ejected from platforms and coalitions, not because his ideas are just uniquely extreme in the abstract. It's that he violates transitivity. He forces people to choose between existing allies and him. Alliance systems punish that. So when Nick praises Putin, Orban, and other illiberal leaders, right, he is trying to create people who are the enemies of his enemies, right? He sees these people as an external anchor point. These are an alternative alliance universe in which liberal democracy, pluralism, Jews, Zionism, and American elite institutions are all part of the outgroup. So his certainty, his aggression, his performative bravado are all predicted by alliance theory, right? Young males in unstable coalitions who are losing status and failing in life, who feel on the margins of reality, have a great need for dominance, purity, and loyalty. They're not trying to persuade, right? The goal here is sorting and consolidation. Fuentes is not trying to win a broad coalition. He's not trying to win America. He's trying to build the nucleus of a small, hard, ideologically homogeneous super alliance that someday challenges the existing one. Now, if the populist right stabilizes into institutions and electorally successful coalitions, Nick Fuentes will be marginalized as a factionalist who failed this transitivity test. Now, if the populist coalition fractures under pressure, people like Nick become more relevant because they are identity-hardening entrepreneurs who offer sharp boundaries and total loyalty. So his trajectory is not mainly about his ideas. It's not mainly about his anti-Semitism or Catholicism or race theory. It's about refounding a coalition under conditions of status anxiety and alliance realignment.
when Trump would call him after his show aired, I think Tucker was, just kind of shocked that the leader of the free world was watching this much cable news and calling to give notes. And he thought maybe Trump would have a better use of his time. So I think initially he was a little taken aback by that. I mean, I think he found Trump entertaining. I think he sort of, thought he was kind of a charming rogue, which were the kind of people he used to write about. But I don't think he thought that he was necessarily, equipped to be president.
Now, Jason, where did Carlson actively disagree with Trump or the MAGA party line?
Not in many places. I think I think it wasn't so much a sense of disagreement as much as he actually sort of believed it maybe more than Trump did. I mean, I think he was he was more committed to the anti-immigration stuff, the anti-crime things, kind of those issues than Trump was himself. And if he had issues with Trump, Trump was maybe just too casual of a racist. He didn't really believe it.
Why was Tucker Carlson fired by Fox?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I was not able to get to the bottom of that.
Does Tucker Carlson know?
No, I don't think he does. I mean, he has a theory, as far as I can tell, as I understand his theory. He didn't tell this to me, but I think he's told this to other people. His theory is that he was offered up to Dominion as part of the Dominion settlement. The Dominion case was a lawsuit filed by a company that counts votes. After the 2020 election, Dominion became the center of a number of conspiracy theories that, alleged that the election had been stolen from Trump. Those conspiracy theories were given a lot of air on Fox News, not by Tucker Carlson, it should be said, but by other hosts. And Dominion sued. And
so let's think about the Bibi Netanyahu trajectory, right? He's a master alliance broker. His power always comes from maintaining a specific coalition geometry, and his vulnerability is that geometry is collapsing. So he rose to power by combining four groups: security hawks and the IDF old guard, religious Zionists and settlers, the Mizrahi Jews, right, the traditional working class Israeli voters. The Mizrahi means Middle Eastern Jews, and the free market pro-US, pro-tech elites. This was his bridging alliance. He was connected to high-status institutions, plus status resentful masses among the Sephardim and the Mizrahi Jews, and united by shared enemies: the Arabs, the Iranians, the Israeli left, Oslo technocrats, and global NGOs and global courts. So his genius was transitivity management. He made each faction believe that the others were indispensable allies against these existential enemies. And he has survived because he satisfied all three alliance conditions, right? Similarity through identity, language, Jewish survival, security, history. Yet solid enemies: Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, UN, the Israeli left. And he provided interdependence through patronage and protection. He had budgets for settlers and yeshivas, deregulation for tycoons, and prestige and autonomy for security elites. So his moral language was in service of his coalition, right? Judicial reform was not about abstract constitutional theory. It was about weakening an institution allied with his enemies, and he was about strengthening institutions allied with his coalition. Now, October 7 shattered transitivity. The security establishment, once the core ally, became an enemy. Families of hostages, reservists, tech elites, centrist voters came to see him as personally responsible for the disaster of October 7, 2023. He was no longer the focal point that coordinated loyalty. He was a contested node. His dependence on the religious nationalist right deepened. His coalition narrowed. That raised its commitment costs. This is dangerous. Narrow coalitions are intense but brittle. They lack bridging capacity. They alienate swing allies. They provoke counter coalitions. Now, his current rhetoric shows classic late-stage alliance psychology. Extreme victim framing: Israel is besieged. Netanyahu is uniquely persecuted. Moral absolutism: any internal dissent equals betrayal. He demonizes his enemies: courts, media, Biden administration, intelligence chiefs. Right? His coalition is contracting. Now, three possible paths for Bibi. He could rebuild his coalition. He could reconstruct a transitive alliance with security elites and centrists by delivering decisive military and diplomatic outcomes. He could reestablish himself as the indispensable coordinator between these rival factions. So he needs visible successes and face-saving exits for rival factions. he can double down on the religious nationalist vote. He can turn himself into the leader of a hard, loyal minority superfaction, a late-stage populist. And once his allies conclude that he is a liability rather than an asset, then his political reign will collapse, loyalty will flip. Same institutions that once defended Netanyahu will reinterpret him as reckless, corrupt, and dangerous, and then moral narratives will update after the alliances shift, not before. So his fate will not be decided by the courts, by protests, or even elections. It will be decided by whether the Israeli security technocratic elite and the U.S.-Israeli strategic network continue to treat him as a necessary ally, or will they reclassify him as an obstacle. So if he remains the best coordinator of Israel's dominant alliance structure, he survives. If a rival can assemble a broader, more transitive coalition that includes security elite, centrists, and international patrons, then Bibi's support will evaporate with stunning speed.
Dominion wanted $1 billion from Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch wasn't going to go to $1 billion, so he offered less than $1 billion in Tucker Carlson's scalp.
Did losing his job at Fox intensify his ideology?
I don't think it intensified his ideology. I think it basically just took the guardrails off. I think, people talk about how Trump 2.0 was, there are no guardrails. He's unrestrained. I think Tucker post-Fox is similar. There's just no one there anymore to tell him no. I mean, when he was at Fox, there was nominal corporate supervision. It was a publicly traded company. I mean, he was always testing that, and he was always crossing lines that other anchors there couldn't, and they would let him get away with it. But at the end of the day, I think he still kind of felt a little bit restrained or constrained. He does not feel that anymore. And I think he also, in addition to not having those guardrails, I think he understands that without the Fox platform, he needs to do things that generate enough outrage that get him attention. And so, while I think he does believe what he says, I think there's another thing going on where he knows he needs to get people to keep on tuning into him and coming back to him.
So anti-Semitism as good business?
I think he's made that calculation, yeah.
Well, in recent years, Carlson has taken to overtly putting on extremists on his YouTube channel. One of the most infamous, of course, is Nick Fuentes, who's a white supremacist, who's praised Hitler, who jokes about it, he shoves it in your face. And, of course, he dined with Trump and Kanye West at Mar-a-Lago. Fuentes, in October, was on Carlson's show. Let's listen to a clip from that.
So I realized that the conservative movement was completely bankrupt in that way.
Yeah. Well,
and I became very radical.
Well, you became, let me just say, I'm so familiar with, I was much older when it happened to me and much more insulated. I was not a college student. I was like 45. So, and I was in a much better place to withstand the pressure. But I do think this is my main question to you is, when you get attacked, when people call you names, like they always called me racist, and I would always think to myself, I'm actually not. I would tell you if I was racist. I'm a little sexist, but I'm not racist. And I never understood why they did that. And then I thought maybe the point is to make me racist. Where you just get to a point where you're like, well, if you're going to slander me, then I'll just become the thing you're calling me. I do think that's a feature of human nature, don't you? Mm-hmm. And if you stare too intently at the accusers, at the, whatever Ben Shapiro's or Mark Levin's or Ted Cruz or whoever it is calling you names, it like distorts you and you actually change and become what they say you are. Have you thought that ever? Do you worry that happened to you?
No, I don't think it ever did because I know who I am.
This is a moment of self-searching almost from Tucker Carlson.
So let's apply alliance theory to Tucker Carlson's metamorphosis, right? His change from country club Republican to a populist, right, reflects much less a change of heart than a series of strategic maneuvers in a high-stakes status and alliance game, right? Political beliefs do not stem from deep-seated moral values. They are made-up narratives designed to support allies and to denigrate rivals. So searching for the definitive moment where Tucker Carlson changed his tune is a mistake, because we don't really have a stable mind to unravel. That's just part of the story that we tell ourselves to look consistent. In reality, our brains are designed to follow incentives. So Tucker Carlson's early career as a polite country club Republican hawk was not necessarily any more authentic than his current populism, right? He simply is making different moves in different games. In the late 1990s, the high-status move for a child of Republican royalty was to be a neocon at the Weekly Standard. Then the media landscape shifts to reward virality. His incentives change, and his beliefs shift to match the new alliance structure that promises him the most power and status and attention. So, Tucker Carlson is a slave to virality. Well, we're all pretty much slaves to incentives. Right? Tucker learned to hire reporters who wrote stories to actively mock and antagonize liberals because that was the way to get traffic. Right? Argument is a tool that we use to hurt our enemies and to bolster our side. We use propaganda to support our allies. By humiliating left and liberal guests, right, Tucker Carlson was not primarily debating ideas. He was engaging in a status game. He was lowering the status of his enemies to elevate the status of his allies. When Tucker shifted from mocking Ross Perot to championing Populism, he wasn't violating the core principle. He was swapping one made-up moral narrative for another that better served him with his current alliance with the MAGA base. So Tucker Carlson is a member of the elite who gains status by attacking the elite. That is similar to Donald Trump. It's just playing the opinion game. Now frames himself as hated by all the right people, so he signals he has the courage to defy social norms. Right? This earns him admiration and approval from a specific alliance, the MAGA base. And he gets to conceal his own status-seeking behind a narrative of speaking truth to power. Does Tucker really believe the things he says? This is a BS question. We're all self-deceivers. We do not understand our own motives because our brains are designed to hide our status-seeking from ourselves. Whether Tucker believes his rhetoric is irrelevant to the function his rhetoric serves. His rhetoric is just a series of signals to coordinate his alliance. So if Darryl Cooper or Nick Fuentes provide the necessary content to keep his alliance energized and his rivals enraged, then Tucker Carlson's brain will generate whatever internal feeling of belief is required to deliver those signals effectively.
Very introspective, yeah. I mean, the Fuentes interview was fascinating because I think the reason he had Fuentes on his show was because he was worried that Fuentes was getting his audience in some ways. You know, they had this kind of little feud going on where Tucker had said a lot of derogatory things about Fuentes. He accused him of being a Fed. He thought he was a PSYOP operation. And Fuentes fired back on his show, and it seemed, and there was this feud going on online, and it seemed like Tucker was losing. I mean, all of Fuentes' fans were, just attacking Tucker on X and pillorying him, and he had Fuentes on because I think he recognized that he couldn't afford to alienate Fuentes' audience. So he kind of extended this olive branch and, made nice with him.
Right, he's engaging in coalition management. Right, people aren't following Tucker Carlson because they're gullible. We did not evolve to be gullible. We evolved to be tribal. Right, people aren't being fooled and brainwashed by Tucker Carlson. People make calculated social moves. Our brains are designed to further our survival prospects, right? We don't simply absorb Tucker's views because we are naive. People adopt them when they serve as useful alliance signals. If you're a member of a group, adopting specific, say, counterintuitive rhetoric of your group's leader, like Tucker Carlson, is not a sign of gullibility, it's a sign of loyalty. By repeating fantastical, fanatical points, you signal to your loyalty to your allies you are one of them, and you signal to your enemies that you are a threat. So when titans of industry, members of Congress, take their cues from Tucker Carlson, right, that means coordination signals, not so much information. It's not that Republican elites are convinced by Tucker Carlson's logic. They recognize that Tucker has the ear of a massive alliance, the MAGA base. Now, to remain high status within that alliance, these Republican elites must align their public rhetoric with Carlson. He is a focal point. He's a person who determines what the current winning arguments are for that side of the political spectrum. So to be an effective ally, your brain hides your true cynical motives of status and power from your conscious mind. So you get to say that you're just pursuing truth and justice and everything that's righteous, and you get to say it with a genuine sense of moral conviction. All right, Tucker Carlson provides the ammunition, the arguments, and his audience provides the deployment. They repeat those arguments in their own social circle. So Tucker doesn't take conservative media with him by being a master of persuasion and truth-seeking. Right? He simply identifies the most potent stative incentives. He recognizes where the puck is going, and he follows the puck. He offers stories allow people to pursue these incentives while feeling like moral heroes. Right? He uses high-status moral language within his tribe to pathologize his enemies.
Influential is Tucker Carlson now?
I think he's very influential. I think he's influential in a couple ways. I mean, I think he's very influential inside the Trump administration. When Trump was president first time around and Tucker was on Fox, he did not talk to Trump that much personally. He kind of avoided it. That is not the case this time around. I mean, I think one reason is, the first time around he knew Trump would watch his show on Fox. He could talk to him through the TV. He does not think that Donald Trump's going to listen to a 2-hour podcast now. So he has to talk to him directly. He's very close to JD Vance. He has a number of allies in the administration, Bobby Kennedy, Tulsi Gabbard, all the way down to, sub-cabinet positions. He's friends with those people. So there's just that matter of his influence in government.
So where is Tucker going, right? He is looking for the most efficient market for status and alliance coordination. He is looking to be the top guy for sending out alliance signals. He's been cast out of the legacy media elite. He's now a freelance alliance builder. So one would expect he will continue to expand his own media ecosystem. He gets to eliminate the middleman, the gatekeepers who previously controlled his status. Carlson's no longer an employee. He is a node around which a massive alliance coordinates. His goal is to provide a parallel epistemology, right? A parallel set of facts and narratives that his audience can then use to signal their distance from the elites. By putting on these socially radioactive figures, Tucker forces his audience to choose. Are you with the consensus that says these are bad people, or are you with me? So he creates a tighter, more resilient alliance of people who have burned their bridges with the mainstream. Tucker is also likely to become some kind of shadow political strategist. Because Tucker closely follows web metrics, he has an early warning system for where the base is headed. If he can keep his role as the person who defines what the MAGA base truly cares about, then Republican politicians will have to keep taking their cues from Tucker. He doesn't need to hold office. He just needs to control the status of incentives for those who do. If a Republican candidate knows that being hated by Tucker is a death sentence for his primary chances, Tucker remains the de facto leader of the MAGA base. Right? And now Tucker seems to be moving towards a transnational alliance building. Right? He is an American-first populist building a global network. He is connecting various outsider groups across the world, populists in Europe, nationalists in Russia, the MAGA base in America, into a single high-status counter-alliance against the liberal international order. Now, if Tucker moves so far into the fringe that the mainstream stops talking about him, he loses his hated by all the right people edge. Tucker needs the elites to keep attacking him. Their condemnation is the fuel that proves to his followers that he is their champion. The elite alliance ignores him, his status within his own group will decay as the excitement and terror he provides vanishes. So Tucker is successful because he is skilled at operating with a highly successful status arbitrage strategy. Right? He's moved to where the base is going.
Beyond that, people listen to his show. He's able to smuggle ideas that were considered, just out of bounds. He's able to smuggle them into the mainstream now because he gives them voice on his show, and he's a talented enough communicator and a smart enough guy that he can explain them in ways that they maybe don't seem quite as awful as they are when they're presented in their kind of raw form. And the fracturing of the media landscape being what it is, in some ways getting fired from Fox was almost like a blessing for him because he got...
His audience is smaller now, but it is much more intense. Right. So 1 million listeners who treat Tucker Carlson as their primary source of truth are a more potent political force than 3 million casual viewers who watch him between commercials. So Tucker has replaced advertiser status with subscriber loyalty. That makes his alliance harder to disarm through traditional elite pressure, such as advertising boycotts. So he's a diplomat for a new international outsider alliance. He appeared at events in Saudi Arabia. He's moving beyond domestic American politics. And so he can signal to his audience that he possesses a level of international status and access that regular journalists cannot reach. So that reinforces his narrative that he is the one telling you what is really happening on a global scale. He's also becoming a mogul of a specific lifestyle. He's a leader in the manosphere, right? He is synonymous with nicotine pouches and edgelord humor. He has built an alliance with younger men, right? It's not primarily about nicotine. It's about identity signaling, right? By using the same products and laughing at the same DEI jokes, Tucker creates a sense of shared tribal identity that is visceral and lifestyle-based, not just purely intellectual. So his success depends on his ability to remain a credible threat to the elites. He must stay large enough to be dangerous to the elites, but independent enough so that they cannot control him.
A head start on figuring out this new media landscape. I mean, cable news is kind of a dying medium. And just, thinking about the people out there today who are, influential voices on the right, you don't really hear about like Sean Hannity that much. You don't hear about, Jesse Waters or Laura Ingraham. You hear a lot about Tucker. You hear a lot about Nick Fuentes. You hear a lot before Charlie Kirk was killed. You heard a lot about Charlie Kirk. That's where the energy is. And that's where I think younger conservatives are looking for their arguments and ideas.
What does Tucker Carlson want?
That's a fantastic question. And that's a question that I think is occupying the minds of a lot of people in Republican politics and in the conservative movement, because I think his critics and his enemies hope that he just wants to be a podcaster and sell, his tobacco pouches and whatever else, and that he'll stop at that. He just wants to be wealthy. I don't think that's where he wants to stop, though. I think.
So our political beliefs do not emerge from stable moral values. They come from ever-shifting alliances and rivalries. So people like Tucker serve as a bridge or a node to define and strengthen these alliance structures through strategic stories. So pundits like Tucker adopt the ideologies of their coalition to maximize their own status and power. So Tucker shifted from a libertarian-leaning magazine writer to a populist firebrand to go where the audience is going. So early on, he was a moderate Republican libertarian. Then as the base of the Republican Party shifted, Tucker repositioned himself as a prophet for this new base to create and secure fame, fortune, and influence. Right? We tend to adopt the social preferences of our allies. So Tucker was a critic of 9/11 conspiracy theories at one point when he was part of the establishment. Now he's become a defender of 9/11 conspiracy theories. He has shifted from criticizing Vladimir Putin to expressing sympathy for Putin because he's adopting the rivalries and alliances of his new anti-establishment base. So Tucker consistently portrays white men and trads as victims of a corrupt ruling class and multicultural system. So this mobilizes his audience against a perceived enemy. Right. Tucker will explain and rationalize radical ideas such as the Great Replacement theory because they appeal to his allies, even though these ideas conflict with more traditional conservative values that he used to champion. By labeling mainstream institutions like the FBI or the WHO as untrustworthy, he helps his alliance structure close the status of rival groups, effectively barring them from being considered legitimate authority figures within his coalition. So our belief systems are a patchwork of ad hoc and incompatible moral principles designed to advance the interests of one specific alliance against its enemies. In his career, it shows a sequence of shifting alliance commitments rather than any kind of ideological evolution. Early on, Tucker was embedded in an establishment conservative coalition, and his allies were legacy media institutions, Republican elites, neocon foreign policy circles, and Fox's older donor class. And his rhetoric consistently defended those groups, their wars, their economic order, and their cultural authority. He mocked populists in the 2000s. He was enforcing alliance boundaries. He was policing who counted as respectable within the Republican coalition. Then, with the rise of Trump, the Republican alliance structure fractured. So a new super alliance formed around the working class, anti-globalists, internet dissidents, religious trads, status declining men. And Trump became the focal point that revealed the transitivity of this new bloc. Elite media, intelligence agencies, universities, and multinational corporations became the enemy. So Trump realigned more than he converted. He detected this rising power center that was no longer the old donor class, but it was a mass coalition defined by grievance against elites. So once you reassign who your allies are and who your enemies are, your moral judgments, your threat perceptions, and your values will rapidly reconfigure to serve the new alliance. Right? So the military becomes sacred except when it serves up globalist wars. The FBI becomes suspect once it aligns with the enemy. Free trade becomes immoral once it harms Tucker's new in-group. Tech censorship becomes civilizational tyranny once it targets coalition members. Foreign leaders such as Putin and Orban become morally interesting once they are perceived as enemies of Tucker's enemies. Right? This is not hypocrisy. This is alliance, consistent cognition. Right? Tucker moved from snarky insider to moralized defender of an embattled tribe. His victim narrative intensified. Out-group malevolence is emphasized. In-group suffering is amplified. Elite corruption becomes personalized and demonized.
He's as much a political operator these days as he is as a media figure. And I think he considers himself a movement leader. And I think he wants to be at the head of that movement, whether it's in government or out of government. I don't think he's been able to figure that out yet.
So you think it's possible that he would run for office?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I think that in a lot of ways, Trump has completely upended what it means to be in politics these days. And so much of politics now is just being a media figure and being an entertainer. And Tucker does those things very well. Plus, he has some pretty core ideological beliefs. And I think he wants to see those beliefs, take root in the country.
Yes, if JD Vance falters, get ready for President Tucker. So Tucker's incentives were increasingly not aligned with his host, Fox News. Right? Fox's corporate and regulatory entanglements increasingly made Fox the very institutional network that Tucker's new coalition recognized as hostile. So he could no longer treat Fox as an ally. It was a compromised intermediary. And his post-Fox turn toward long-form interviews with dissidents, nationalists, religious trads, heterodox scientists is a classic alliance consolidation. He is mapping the moral and information universe of a counter-elite bloc. He is building common knowledge among people who already share enemies, just need shared narratives to become a durable super-alliance. So Tucker is radicalized without changing his personality. The cognitive machinery is the same. The ally set has changed. Once the ally set changes, all the moral weight shifts automatically. So Tucker is not drifting rightward or leftward. He is migrating toward the pole of a new dominant coalition and acting as its narrative synthesizer. He's doing for the post-liberal, post-globalist alliance what legacy pundits such as William F. Buckley once did for the Cold War liberal and Reaganite alliances. Tucker is generating moral coherence, he is identifying traitors, he is sacralizing insiders, and he is turning geopolitical analysis into coalition myth. If the current populist nationalist bloc fractures, Tucker will shift again. Right? His cognition is tuned to track where the real lines of loyalty and power have moved. Right? So Tucker is ever adapting to shifting Republican political alliances.
And be executed. And I think the question for him is what's the best vehicle for that? I mean, right now, JD Vance is saying all the things that Tucker believes. And I think, maybe if Tucker has his druthers, JD Vance can be the person who becomes president and does all these things, and Tucker will be whispering in his ear. But at the same time, JD Vance isn't that talented a politician. And, I think if Tucker Carlson concludes that JD Vance can't get elected, can't become president, well then, maybe he has to do it himself. And
Tucker is the best public speaker on the right. And his career mirrors the GOP's pivot from a neoconservative globalism, pro-war, pro-free trade, pro-foreign intervention, to Trump-era populism, anti-elite isolationists focused on helping the losers of globalization. So his early alliances were with the Republican establishment, with neocons, libertarian groups, right? People who shared his education background. Right? He initially supported the 2003 Iraq War. Then, as these alliances fragmented, right, he saw the new base, and he went where the puck was going.
I think our politics are at a place where that really doesn't seem as outrageous as it would have even just a couple of years ago.
So I just find alliance theory such a powerful tool for decoding reality.
To find out, we're going to compare two strategies in the simple majority game: allies and neutrals. Allies play the game. They choose another player at random. So if Bob is an ally, he's going to choose at random between you and me. Neutrals refuse to play the game. They choose neither player. In the arena of natural selection, which strategy wins? To find out, we're going to look at the favoritism game because it's mathematically the simplest. And we're going to let A be the percentage of allies in the population, which means that A minus 1 is the percentage of neutrals. And here it is, the tragedy of the human condition in math, as I like to think of it. On the left side are the net payoffs for allies, depending on the frequency of each strategy. And on the right side of the inequality are the net payoffs for neutrals, depending on the frequency.
I love the clarity of the following evolutionary psychologist, Aaron Sell, and the way that he defines the evolution of anger and hatred, the difference between them.
It's really into anger, hatred, and other emotions. What would you say is the best framework for understanding emotions from an evolutionary perspective?
That's a good question. I think and there are really two ways of using evolutionary theory to understand an organism. There's the phylogenetic approach, which is what you usually hear about, right? It's the, we came from apes or something like that, and therefore this other animal does a thing, and that's probably why we do it. We've inherited that from them. That's useful. I don't cast, to disparage those approaches, but they have limitations, and their big limitations are they can't account for unique features of any organism, because if it's unique, you can't trace it to your ancestor, right? So how do you account for the elephant trunk if it's recent, its only living ancestors don't have it, right? Mm-hmm. And it also doesn't explain things particularly functionally, which is what you need, I think, to understand complex organisms or complex organs and mental adaptations. So the other approach other than phylogenetic is the adaptationist approach, which says that natural selection builds complex functional machinery. That's what life is. And by using that and identifying the function of any particular organ or adaptation, you can explain its features really well. And so that's the approach I use, particularly with anger, which is, what is its function? Why is it? Anger has, a lot of problems to it. It causes, relationships to break down. It causes aggression, gets you killed sometimes. And so why is it, our ancestors who didn't have anger didn't reproduce better? Why didn't we descend from the non-angry people? We all descended from people who had something like modern anger. And so it was doing something to help our reproduction. And once we identified that, it explains the features of anger and why it works the way it does.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you what social emotions are, but does it make sense to talk about social and non-social emotions?
Well, I think we could divide the world that way if we want to. So emotions from an evolutionary psychological perspective are kind of emergency systems that sort of come online to deal with some recurrent adaptive problem. And they sort of usurp a lot of different features of the mind and the body, right? So your autonomic nervous system responds, your face, your voice, your attention systems, your perceptual systems change under different emotions. And some of these emotions are built, I think, to deal with social negotiation, so anger, or to deal with social problems, hatred being an example, shame, guilt, and so forth. There are other emotions, things like fear or anxiety that may be social but may not be. You can be afraid of heights, you can be afraid of fire, you can be afraid of animals. So, if people want to make that distinction, they can. I sort of think the most important distinction is to group them by function. Right? What is the function of this particular emotion? Then study that to some extent separately from the other emotions.
With that in mind, then, what are the functions of anger? And what is anger, generally speaking?
That's great. The most highly edited sentence in any paper I ever wrote was one of my first papers where I introduced my theory of anger. It's called the recalibrational theory. And we defined anger as, we said that a large and well-bounded set of the phenomenon people refer to as anger can be explained as an adaptation to bargain for better treatment. And we put it that way because if you say the word anger, it can mean lots of different things. It's like the word love. I love ketchup and I love orange soda and my children and my wife, but all in very different ways. There's a core commonality. There's a reason we're using the word love for that. It's something of high value. Understood that way, anger is a very complicated mechanism in the mind. Most of what it does can be explained as an adaptation that bargains for better treatment, that the function of it is to get other human beings' brains to recalibrate and treat you better. Colloquially, it would be to treat you with more respect. There are other.
So Ronald Reagan rose to success because he was able to energize all the different members of the Republican coalition, working class, Catholic, usually Democratic Party voting ethnics, and the national security hawks, and the free market crowd, and the anti-abortion Christian crowd. And Reagan was able to bring them all together. So what about JD Vance? So JD Vance, like Reagan, is a bridging figure. He is the expected leader of the post-Trump coalition, and his future depends entirely whether he can remain a trusted transitivity node between factions that do not naturally like each other. So he started in one alliance world. He was part of the coastal elite. He was a venture capitalist. He went to Yale Law School. He was a tech libertarian. He was an anti-Trump conservative. And so he's part of one coalition with its own status system, its own moral language, and its own set of enemies. Then he defected and realigned with the Trump Super Alliance, composed of working-class, white, populist, cultural trads, post-liberal intellectuals, anti-globalist nationalists, and the MAGA base. So this wasn't just an ideological shift. It was an alliance migration. His enemies changed. His friends changed. His moral language changed accordingly. So once a person reassigns their primary allies and enemies, their beliefs reconfigure fast and deeply, and that's exactly what we see. So markets go from sacred to predatory. Tech goes from innovative to decadent. Foreign policy goes from interventionist to realist. Elites go from mentors to traitors. None of this requires hypocrisy. It just requires loyalty updating. So why did Vance rise so quickly? Because he occupies a rare structural niche. He is a bridge between the populist masses and elites, nationalist voters and institutional respectability, post-liberal theory circles and electoral politics, Silicon Valley money and Rust Belt grievance. So people like Vance become powerful, right, when their coalition needs internal coordination more than external persuasion. So after Trump, the right's problem is not beating the left. It is stabilizing itself. Who will lead? What will the doctrine be? Which factions will dominate? So Vance offers a story that allows high-status defectors and low-status resentful voters to see each other as natural allies in a shared civilizational fight. So his rhetoric performs three key alliance functions: purification without schism. He attacks the regime, the elites, the NGOs, the permanent bureaucracy, but does not do so in a way that keeps donors, courts, and the military as enemies. So he's able to sharpen boundaries without total rupture. He signals his elite conversion. His biography is propaganda. It tells ambitious young professionals that you can defect from the old order and develop status inside the new order. He provides a role model for coalition expansion upward in status. Third, Vance provides a story about moral recentering, where economic nationalism, religious traditionalism, state power all become coherent parts of one project. Right? That coherence is not primarily philosophical. It's primarily coalitional. So his prospects hinge on his abilities with transitivity and trust. Populist voters trust him now because he performs grievance authentically. Institutional conservatives tolerate him because he speaks their language and he does not threaten their core interests directly. Donors hedge because he is smart, disciplined, and legible. Post-liberal intellectuals see him as their first real chance at state power. So if he can maintain a coalition among these groups where they see each other as natural allies, Vance becomes powerful. He becomes the post-Trump coalition long-term standard-bearer. He becomes the man who can outlive Trump the way that Reagan outlived Goldwater, and he may well prove to be far more effective than Trump. But he faces two key structural dangers: authenticity tests, right? Populist coalitions punish perceived elite reversion brutally. Any sign that Trump is really Yale, really tech, really donor captured will trigger alliance defection. Right? The victim narrative will flip from we to you betrayed us. Second obstacle, factional war. So the MAGA alliance institutionalizes internal enemies, replace external ones. Evangelicals, nationalists, tech populists, security hawks are all competing for dominance. Vance will have to choose sides. So bridging figures fall when coalitions polarize internally, when transitivity becomes impossible. So if the post-liberal nationalist working class coalition becomes the dominant governing bloc of the 2030s, Vance is structurally positioned to be its prime minister. He's not a charismatic Caesar like Trump, but he is a potential coordinator of elites and the masses. He is a system builder. Now, if the coalition fragments, radicalizes, or loses electoral viability, Vance will be either absorbed back into a softer conservative elite world as a reform populist, or he'll be sacrificed by the populace as another elite who just used us and left. So JD Vance has risen to power not because of his ideas. He rises because he sits at the intersection of multiple alliance streams, and he can plausibly say to each, I am one of you, and I am your translator to the others. So his future depends on how long that claim can remain credible.
Other kind of subroutines, things we sometimes refer to as anger that don't fit that pattern. So you get frustrated because, like, I don't know, a piece, you're trying to fix a clock and the thing won't fit into the thing and you get frustrated and you jam it and break it, that sort of, or you're trying to climb a tree and you can't, and so you get frustrated and just grab it and rip your arm. That actually happened to me in grad school. And so I get those things aren't you recalibrating the clock's mind or anything like that. So there are, at the fringes, what you see are, that it's a very complex system that has many different parts, and some of those parts are fired by alternative systems. So there might be some other system like a frustration system or something like that, or determination, where one of the features of anger is that it prepares you to pay costs to get that long-term benefit of recalibrating a person. And sometimes, so when you get angry at people, you should expect there are going to be some short-term costs to that. And it was selected for because of the long-term benefits that follow.
I just find it fascinating, his explanation of the evolutionary benefits of various emotions. Right, this is David Pinsoff, lectures called Strange Bedfellows, the Alliance Theory of Political Belief Systems.
Each strategy. This math looks way more complicated than it is. I assure you it's actually quite simple. Let me walk you through it piece by piece. So this part right here, that's just what happens if an ally is in a triad with two other neutrals, which happens 1 minus a squared % of the time. In that case, nobody gets anything. This is what happens if an ally is in a triad with one other ally and one neutral. In that case, the two allies will form an alliance a quarter of the time. This is what happens if an ally is in a triad with two other allies, in which case they'll form an alliance half the time and get ganged up on by the other two a quarter of the time. This is what happens if a neutral is with two neutrals. They get nothing. This is when a neutral is with one ally and one neutral. Still, nobody gets anything. And this is when a neutral is with two allies, in which case they get ganged up on by those allies a quarter of the time. And so this seemingly complicated math can actually be simplified to this bit of math. VA is greater than 0. We have already stipulated this to be true, which means that allies are sadly an ESS. So why are allies an ESS? Well, there are benefits to forming an alliance. Neutrals miss out on these benefits. Yes, there are costs to getting ganged up on too, and those costs can be quite severe. But here's the important part. Neutrals are just as likely to suffer these costs as allies. Neither strategy can control whether the other two players form an alliance against them. So the strategies have the same expected costs, and the cost terms actually cancel out in the math. The costs don't matter. They could be as high as death, in theory. Which means the higher these costs, the more the entire species becomes worse off as allies invade and remain stable. But it doesn't matter, because evolution does not care about the good of the species. It only cares about the relative frequency of genes. So this is a bummer, but I also think it has important implications. I used the payoffs for the favoritism game, but I could have picked any of the games we looked at.
Whoops, I was muted. So David Pinsoff summarizes that if you had to summarize the outlook of intellectuals in one sentence, it would be everything that is wrong with the world is caused by misunderstanding. Political polarization, misinformation, bigotry, stereotypes, or just a big misunderstanding. Then he proceeds to demolish that case.
Since the payoffs are ranked in the same order across all those games, the math actually works out the same for all those games. Which means It is an ESS to accuse each other of witchcraft in the witch hunt game, grab each other's stuff in the grabbing game, and form political alliances to advance each other's agendas, which might include grabbing each other's stuff and accusing each other of witchcraft. In other words, it pays to form alliances even if you're choosing allies at random.
So the essence of the Pinsophian worldview is all these things that are supposedly misunderstandings are not misunderstandings. 1, stereotypes are savvy. Our beliefs about religious, ethnic, occupational, and geographic groups are pretty accurate. The accuracy of stereotypes is one of the most robust and well-replicated findings in psychology. But this is suppressed by psychologists because they're terrified of any information that might make them look insufficiently progressive. Also, they hate Republicans, which makes sense because partisan hatred is not a mistake. It's not a misunderstanding. Why do partisans hate each other? It's not because they are dumb. It's not because they gave in to a primitive urge called tribalism. It's not because they had a senior moment and forgot to check for disconfirming evidence of propaganda. It's because we're all locked in a zero-sum competition over the coercive apparatus of the state. We're all locked in an iron cage together. Right? The state is the thing that forcibly puts human beings in prison at gunpoint. The stakes are high. What do we do in a high-stakes competition? We fight dirty. We demonize the competition, and we deny we're doing this, and we embellish how much the other side is doing it because denial and embellishment are useful weapons to wield in a fight. Bigotry is not a mistake. It's not a brain fart. Ethnic minorities are accurately stereotyped as allies of the Democratic Party. Feeling threatened by ethnic minorities is related to feeling threatened by Democrats in the same way that feeling threatened by Christians is related to feeling threatened by Republicans. Right? Bigotry comes from the zero-sum competition over intergroup status. And this competition is often most acute among ethnic minorities' closest rivals in the social hierarchy, i.e. low-status white people, which is why anti-racism confers elite status. And it explains why anti-racist elites resent millionaires and billionaires who are their closest rivals in the hierarchy. Misinformation is a moral panic. It is a propaganda tool. And we're fundamentally rational, self-interested. We have confirmation bias because that helps us win arguments to justify our actions. We are overconfident because that helps us make money, gain status, convince people that we know what we're doing even when we don't. We have a loss aversion because it helps us make decisions that we can better justify others. The spotlight effect is rational in a competitive social marketplace because it's better to err on the side of caution than to suffer the horrors of social exile. The endowment effect, where things seem more precious once we own them, is rational if we're competing for resources. We are self-serving because it's self-serving. We have positive illusions about ourselves because it's self-serving.
So we've arrived at our first of many ESSs, play the game. Here's our second ESS. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. You're probably familiar with this ancient proverb. It also happens to be an ESS in the simple majority game. But why? To answer this question, we're going to look at a 5-player favoritism game. The goal of this game is to form a special clique, an exclusive trio that provides special benefits to each other. Let's call the people who favor the enemies of their enemies in this game uniters. We're going to compare the payoffs of uniters to the payoffs of allies. So here's the scenario. You and I are friends, and we are enemies of Bob. Denise is also enemies of Bob. She is the enemy of our enemy. Ava is neither friends nor enemies with anyone. In this scenario, uniters will always choose Denise over Ava, because Denise is the enemy of their enemy. Allies, on the other hand, will be indifferent between Denise and Ava. Remember, they're choosing allies at random. Denise will be open to a special trio with you and me. She'll also be open to a trio with you and Ava or me and Ava. So if we choose Denise, we'll have a 1/3 chance that she'll get on board with us. But if we choose Ava, we'll actually have a 1/6 chance that she'll get on board with us because she's going to consider all 6 possible trios. Now, what if uniters become more common? Well, if Denise is a uniter like us, we now have a 100% chance of forming an alliance with Denise because we are the enemies of her enemy, just as she is the enemy of our enemy. So uniters do better when allies when they're rare, and they especially do better when they're common, which means they're an ESS. Here are some other similar ESSs, which we might call axioms of transitivity. The friend of my enemy is my enemy. You're a communist sympathizer, you're a communist. You're a Nazi sympathizer, you're a Nazi. The enemy of my friend is my enemy. You piss off my friend, you piss off me. The friend of my friend is my friend. Any friend of yours is a friend of mine. We can demonstrate that these are also ESSs in the simple majority game, and I've outlined the scenarios for the minimum possible group size for when this strategy is an ESS. So we might wonder why. Why transitivity? The answer is simple: coordination. There is a vast space of possible alliances to choose from. Zeroing in on the same alliance as other agents is a formidable challenge. Insofar as we have the same friends and enemies, we'll want to include and exclude the same people in our alliance. We'll have a smaller number of alliances to choose from, which means we're more likely to choose an alliance that includes each other. There's more overlap in our preferred space of alliances, which means choosing each other is a safer bet. And if we know it's a safer bet, it becomes an even safer bet.
So an ESS is an evolutionary stable strategy.
There's another interesting ESS. If you're like me, you're my friend. We typically choose allies who are like us. They might talk like us or dress like us. Why? Why do we do this? To find out, we're going to consider a liker strategy. Likers choose the player who is like them. If both players are like them or neither player is like them, they revert to an ally strategy, choosing at random. We're going to continue with the favoritism game because it's mathematically simpler. So let's assume that you and I are alike in some way. We're both blue and Bob is green. And we're going to suppose that you are a rare mutant liker. In this case, you're always going to choose me because I'm blue. How does your strategy do? Well, half the time, I'm going to choose you in return if I'm an ally. Quarter of the time, I'll gang up with Bob against you. And a quarter of the time, we'll form a love triangle and nothing will happen. So likers actually have the same payoffs as allies, which means that they neither do better or worse. They could potentially drift in by chance. So now suppose that they do drift in a bit by chance. Suppose likers get a bit more common. Interesting things start to happen here. So now suppose that I'm a liker. We will now have a 100% chance of forming an alliance. That is a pretty powerful strategic advantage. We've doubled our odds of forming an alliance. And what's interesting about this strategy is that this strategic advantage stays the same. In fact, it grows the larger the group size is. Because in larger groups, likers are solving an even larger coordination problem. And so we can actually demonstrate this mathematically, that likers are an ESS. When they're rare, they do the same as allies. But if even a small number of them drift in, they begin forming alliances with one another, and they do especially well when they're in large groups and when there are lots of them to get together. So it is obvious to anyone who's lived on this planet that like attracts like. Birds of a feather flock together. This isn't exactly news. But can we say something more than this? Does the model predict what specific types of similarity will lead to alliances? I think it does. We can say 4 things, in fact. Similarity should be common knowledge, salient, categorical, and exclusive. Let's start with common knowledge. Common knowledge is a very important term in game theory Thomas et al. Defines it as the recursive belief state in which A knows X, B knows X, A knows that B knows X, B knows that A knows X, ad infinitum. It's basically everyone knows that everyone knows something. Players need common knowledge when they're trying to coordinate for mutual benefit. For example, if we're all trying to get together at the same time and place, everyone needs to know that everyone knows the time and place. The simple majority game is, in part, a coordination game. We've already defined an alliance as a coordinated, mutually beneficial relationship that comes at a cost to others. So, for the liker strategy to work, the players need common knowledge that they are alike. To illustrate, let's suppose you're deciding whether or not to choose me as an ally. You might be wondering, does he know that we're both blue? Does he know that I know that we're both blue? Does he know that I know that he knows that we're both blue? If the answer to any of these questions is no, then you can no longer count on me to choose you in return, and your strategy becomes useless. So we need common knowledge of the similarity in order for this strategy to work. This brings me to the second thing, salient. If we have the same tattoo, it won't help us form an alliance if it's covered up by our clothing. Or if the tattoo is visible to us, it won't help us if neither of us notices it. The similarity should be top of mind. Ideally, it should be associated with the simple majority game that we're playing right now. For example, if we're playing the witch hunt game, it will really help us coordinate if we both share the trait hates witches, and we know that the other one knows that the other one knows that we hate witches. If we're playing the grabbing game, it will really help us if we share the trait deserves more stuff. If we're playing the policy game, it will really help us coordinate if we share the trait Democrat or Republican. Categorical. If we're trying to form an alliance of tall people, that's going to be hard. Height is a continuous variable. How tall counts as tall? Am I tall enough? I'm pretty tall, not super tall. This blurriness makes it hard for us to coordinate on who's alike and who's not, especially if we need to create common knowledge of who's alike and who's not. Examples of categorical variables that are often used to form alliances include race. You have dark skin or light skin, residence, you live in the north or the south, the east or the west, you wear the yarmulke or you don't, you worship our God or you don't, you vote for our party or you don't. Exclusive. If everyone is blue, the liker strategy is useless. We won't know whom to favor as our allies. For the strategy to pay off, some people have to be blue and some people don't. Unfortunately, a lot of traits are easy to mimic. You could easily wear all blue and paint your face blue. This creates a copycat problem. So now let's return to the game we were playing, and we're all getting ready to choose whose side we're on. And Bob says, hang on, let me slip into something more comfortable. And he returns in all blue. Bob has thrown a wrench into our strategy. What this means, I think, is that conformity, the copying of others, can be a defensive strategy in the simple majority game. If you want to prevent others from ganging up on you, it's good to blend in and conform. Here's another interesting hypothesis that emerged from this analysis. Might nostalgia be a solution to the copycat problem? That is, forming alliances based on shared history. Nostalgia is a good tactic because you cannot change events. A shared experience cannot be imitated by anyone else. The past is also categorical. You were either there or you weren't. And it's exclusive. Not everyone was there. And if you're a newcomer to our group, then you almost certainly weren't there. Then again, the one problem with the strategy is that the past is not necessarily salient. We sometimes forget about the past. But it can be salient if we make it salient by actively reminiscing about it together and reminding each other of our shared experiences so that they're always top of mind. Remember all we've been through together. This might be one of the functions of nostalgia. Nostalgia provides the motivation to reminisce with other people the better to forge alliances with them when we need to. As we know, nostalgia has been quite popular politically. Trump's campaign slogan is "Make America Great Again," not "Make America Great." The slogan is referring to a bygone era. It is a very nostalgic slogan. The historian Ann Applebaum has actually documented uses of nostalgia in a variety of countries around the world. It's a common political tactic in nationalist movements, and the goal of those movements, not coincidentally, is to exclude newcomers, immigrants, and ethnic minorities from the political alliance. Nostalgia helps them do this because it is exclusive. You lack our shared history. This is a very nice segue, or not so nice segue, into ESS 8. Follow the leader. Suppose everyone loves Bob for some reason. Maybe he's good at mimicking us or reminiscing with us. Maybe he's good at convincing us that he loves our allies and hates our enemies. If this is true, then we're going to favor him in all of the simple majority games I just talked about. We'll assume he's not a witch in the witch hunt game. We'll assume he deserves his resources in the grabbing game. If Bob supports a policy in the policy game, we're going to reflexively support it. If Bob says he hates someone, we're going to hate them because an enemy of Bob's is an enemy of ours. And if he says he loves someone, we're going to love them because any friend of Bob's is a friend of ours.
Damn, I muted while I was sharing you insights that will forever change your life. Man, I'm totally losing status points. And I was muted to improve the sound quality, but doggone it. Twice I've made that mistake. So someone on Twitter calls tattoos goy stamps. Some other comments from Twitter. Friend dating back to high school says he can no longer handle the U.S. Gestapo government. He's got a German life partner. He's spending a lot of time in Germany. He can't take the U.S. government anymore. He's beginning the process to move Germany permanently. And I'm like, cool, you're there now. You're all set. He's like, no. Then he lays out a complex process of establishing permanent residency. I reply, why bother with all that? You're there now, just stay. He explains you can't just do that. There's a process or you'll get sent back. Doesn't get the irony. A comment on X. The big story about Scott Bessent, our Treasury Secretary, is a counter-elite defection. He was George Soros' top money guy. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., JD Vance, Elon Musk, Tulsi Gabbard, Marco Rubio, Howard Lutnick, all defected from the establishment because they saw that we were winning as a credible alternative. Winning solves a lot of problems.
By amassing many allies, Bob has, for all intents and purposes, become a leader. The intriguing implication here is that leadership actually emerges naturally as a byproduct of alliances. It's not a special category. It's just what happens when you have a lot of allies who are loyal to you. ESS 9, target your competitors. So there are many cases where someone's loss is your gain. Suppose we're competing over territory. Reducing your access to it increases mine. Or suppose we're competing over a mate, and hurting you lowers your chances with that mate and increases mine. In these cases, a cost to you might actually be a benefit for me. So when someone is a competitor, it is an ESS to target them. To illustrate why, let's assume we're playing the witch hunt game and we're trying to figure out who is a witch. And let's assume that Bob and I are competing for the same mate. In this case, it's really a no-brainer. I should accuse Bob of witchcraft. Interestingly, there is some empirical evidence that people actually use this strategy. So this is a really interesting paper published in Scientific Reports a few years ago, and it looked at witchcraft accusations in sub-Saharan Africa, where witchcraft beliefs are still quite common. And the authors write that male witches were mostly accused in connections to disputes over wealth and status. Accusations against women were mainly from kin by marriage, and particularly from husbands and co-wives. So these are polygynous societies where there are multiple wives per husband. In this case, the wives are competing for the resources of the husband. There's mating competition. What this suggests is that in a real-life witch hunt game, people are pursuing this strategy of targeting their competitors. There's also some interesting research on witchcraft accusations and status. Here's a handful of papers on that topic. Here are some quotes. Due to the fear of witchcraft accusations, is thought to be closely associated with witchcraft and magic. If a person succeeds, they are accused of using witchcraft to become wealthy. This brings us to ESS 10, Eat the Rich. Recall the grabbing game. We assumed there was perfect equality between the players. We all had V equals V. This assumption often does not hold in real life. Often, resources are distributed unequally. So what if there was inequality in our little scenario? Let's say Bob now has twice as much stuff as us, and we all know that we all know that. Suddenly, the strategic landscape has radically changed. Is it just me, or is there something kind of off about Bob? He's just been acting really rude lately. I don't know. Maybe we should form an alliance against him. There, that's better. So why does envy breed alliances? To find out, we're going to consider a new strategy, envier. When one player has extra stuff, enviers try to form an alliance against that player. And we're going to let E be the amount of extra stuff that one player in a group of size N has, where E is greater than 1. And the alliances we'll be considering are N-1 against 1. And there are 3 possible outcomes. You get the other person's stuff if you form an alliance. If you don't, you get nothing. And if you're targeted, you lose your stuff. And we can demonstrate that enviers are ESSs. Mathematically, this is quite similar to the logic behind the liker strategy. But interestingly, enviers actually do better than allies right off the bat, unlike likers. And we can get into why. So why are enviers in ESS? Well, 2 reasons. 1, they grab more stuff. VE is greater than V. Also, they're better able to coordinate on whose stuff to grab. The dissimilarity where one person is conspicuously wealthier, that functions as a different kind of coordination device, not unlike blue and green. Forming an alliance is better than not forming an alliance. Those are the 2 reasons they do well. Qualifications. There are many. We don't always eat the rich, of course. We sometimes admire them. It depends on what caused their wealth? What if their wealth was caused by their superior skills, wisdom, or work ethic? If so, then targeting them would mean burning a valuable relationship, and the witch hunt came perhaps literally. We'd be alienating a superior partner. So whether we eat the rich depends on whether we think they deserve their riches. Other qualifications. Whether we eat the rich depends on whether they're similar to us, whether they're in competition with us, whether they support our allies or oppose our enemies, and common knowledge of all of the above. Also, the resource being grabbed doesn't have to be money or material goods. It could be social status. It could be political power itself. And the rich don't have to be better off at an absolute level. They just need to be better off than us. It's about relative advantages, relative position. So we've covered 10 ESSs now. Why does any of this matter? I think it matters because our ancestors almost certainly played this game. We know this because our chimpanzee cousins play it, social primates play it, every known hunter-gatherer society has had alliances and coalitions of various kinds. Our ancestors likely played this game with one another many, many times throughout our evolutionary history. The winners would have left more descendants than the losers, and you and I are likely to be descended from the winners, which means we have inherited their winning strategies, which I suspect includes the 10 ESSs we just covered. We have an evolved alliance psychology. Let's take a look at this alliance psychology from a bird's eye view. We choose allies based on similarity, and the similarity should be exclusive, salient, common knowledge, and perhaps nostalgic. We choose allies based on transitivity. We like the enemy of our enemy. We dislike the friend of our enemies and the enemies of our friends. And we like the friends of our friends. Interdependence. When we're both in competition with someone, that's going to bring us together. When we're both unfairly advantaged relative to someone else, that is going to bring us together. If we prefer the same policies in the policy game, that is going to bring us together. Of course, it's not just about choosing allies, it's about actually supporting them and advancing their interests. So what do we do after we've chosen our allies? Well, we might accuse their enemies of transgressions, whether it be witchcraft or any other kind of hard-to-verify transgression. And this is where conspiracy theories might come in. We might deny that our allies are guilty of transgressions that they are accused of, or we might try to downplay their responsibility for them, or how bad they were. We might say that our allies' enemies' advantages are unfair, they're undeserved, they were gotten through deception or treachery. We might say that our allies' advantages, on the other hand, are perfectly fair and just. They got them fair and square through hard work and talent. We might say our allies' policies are wonderful and they're going to make the world a better place and improve the national welfare. We might say our enemies' policies are terrible and they're going to be a catastrophe for everyone. In my 2023 paper, I refer to this collection of biases as propagandistic biases. We spin propaganda to support our allies in political conflicts. I think this is a more perspicuous way of looking at these biases than motivated reasoning per se. So here it is, just to recap again, our sketch of human alliance psychology. We choose allies based on similarity, transitivity, and interdependence, and we support our allies by denying or downplaying their transgressions, justifying their advantages, supporting their policies, and demonizing their enemies. So this is it. This is alliance theory. These are the assumptions of the approach. I think we can explain a lot about our political belief systems just by taking on board these assumptions, which not only have strong theoretical support, but also strong empirical support, as I review in the paper. Okay, let's look at contemporary politics. Let's take a look at strange bedfellows. So according to alliance theory, political belief systems are ultimately explained by political alliance structures. What is a political alliance structure? It's the set of groups widely associated with a political label. For example, corporate CEOs are right-coded, the LGBTQ community is left-coded. Political alliance structures vary across cultures and time periods based on demographic similarities, race, religion, residence. We've talked about this. Conflicts over status or resources, like in the grabbing game. Electoral strategies, follow the leader. We've talked about this. Politicians try to mobilize coalitions and bring strange bedfellows together. And transitivity, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. These are the factors that shape how alliance structures form. And this is a good way of depicting or getting a sense of the political alliance structure in the United States. So this is from a study conducted by Mark Brandt and colleagues. So on the x-axis is the degree to which the groups in question are perceived as either liberal or conservative. And on the y-axis is the degree to which conservatives hate the group more than liberals or show dislike toward the group more than liberals. So among the groups that are rated as liberal and are liked by liberals, we have radical students, atheists, labor unions, gays and lesbians, environmentalists, feminists, people on welfare, and poor people. Among the groups favored by conservatives and rated as conservatives are Christian fundamentalists, anti-abortionists, business people, the military, wealthy people, elderly people, men, whites. Here's another way of depicting the alliance structure. This is from a study conducted by Larry Bartels and colleagues. So the x-axis is the average rating of all these groups by Democrats. The y-axis is the average rating among Republicans. Among the groups liked more by Democrats include journalists, labor unions, United Nations, interesting one, Muslims, college professors, people on food stamps, Google, scientists. Among the groups liked by Republicans include the National Rifle Association, Fox News, of course, wealthy people, farmers, construction workers, police officers, the military again. So how can we summarize this alliance structure? Well, on the left, the Liberal Democrat alliance, we have something like college professors and students, the mainstream media, atheists or non-religious people, quote unquote, big government, environmentalists, single mothers / unmarried people. Single mothers was another one of the groups. Feminists or women, ethnic minorities or immigrants, Muslims, or low-income people or welfare recipients. On the right, we have rural people, Southerners, devout Christians, big business, traditional families, low education people, the white working class, men or anti-feminists, gun owners, police officers, the military, and perhaps speculatively anti-woke counter-elites. It isn't in the graph, but I suspect this is correct. So is this just about status? Maybe this alliance structure reflects just who is high status or powerful relative to who is low status or oppressed in society. This is tough to argue. There are many high status groups on the left side. For example, the mainstream media, scientists, Google, Hollywood movie stars, the United Nations, college professors, quote unquote, big government. And there are many low status groups on the right side, including rural people, low education people, manufacturing workers, and the quote unquote white working class. And there are many groups that are just very difficult to categorize by status. For example, devout Christians, environmentalists, college students, Southerners, gun owners, non-religious people. It's really unclear whether these groups are high status or low status, and yet they are very strongly politically coded. In case you're not convinced of this, there's a wonderful paper by Mark Brandt published in Psych Science where he looks at what explains that graph we just looked at. What explains whether liberals or conservatives like a group more? Brandt looked at moderators of the relationship between ideology and prejudice toward a variety of groups. Brandt compared 6 different statistical models. The ideology-only model used the ideology of the group as the moderator. So according to this model, liberals like the liberal groups, conservatives like the conservative groups. The status-only model used the status of the group as the moderator. According to this model, conservatives like the high-status groups, liberals like the low-status groups. What he found was that the ideology-only model was 3 to 6 times more predictive than the status-only model across a variety of samples. And crucially, adding status as a variable to the ideology-only model added no additional predictive power. It's looking like the simpler, more elegant model is the correct one. So, if it's not status or who's in power or who's not, then what is the deeper pattern to this alliance structure? How can we explain how all these groups hang together in the way they do in the United States in the year 2025? Well, we might ask the same question about a female friend group at a local high school. Why is Kayla besties with Avery while Mia is frenemies with Avery and Kayla told Avery about her crush? Or we can ask the same question about the alliance structure in a chimpanzee society. If you haven't seen the Netflix docuseries Chimp Empire, I highly recommend it. So there are many alliances and betrayals in this docuseries. We might ask the question, why did Jackson form an alliance with Miles and not Abrams? And why did Abrams share meat with Gus but not Miles and Jackson? Or we might ask the same question about the alliance structure in Game of Thrones. This is a diagram made by a superfan of Game of Thrones, mapping all the alliances and betrayals between the different characters in the different houses in Game of Thrones. So we might ask, what is the deeper pattern here? What I want to argue is that the answer could easily be nothing. There doesn't need to be a deeper pattern here. I think as scientists, we should stop looking for one. Politics is not like Star Wars with the dark side and the light side. Politics is like Mean Girls, Game of Thrones, and Chimp Empire. Also, the American alliance structure is far from inevitable. The military is not always right-coded. There are many radical left-wing movements in Latin America, like Chavismo in Venezuela or Peronism in Argentina, that were actually led by former military leaders and championed a kind of militaristic socialism. College professors are not always left-coded. During the early 20th century, they supported the eugenics movement that involved an opposition to immigration because they were of inferior stock. Christian fundamentalists in big business, not a natural alliance by any stretch of the imagination. Religious traditionalism, including opposition to abortion and gay rights, is actually more often associated with left-wing economic views if you look across cultures, particularly in Central Europe and Latin America. The alliance between these two groups in America is quite unusual. Feminists and ethnic minorities. Surely they're natural allies. Not necessarily. During the women's suffrage movement, many feminists actually excluded African Americans from protests and did not like the idea of black men voting. Environmentalists, surely they're always left-coded. Well, no. During the 1980s and 1990s, Green parties in Central and Eastern Europe arose in opposition to Soviet industrial policy. The Soviets were not very eco-friendly. And these groups formed alliances with anti-communists and right-wing nationalists. This is true of Latvia and Estonia during this time period. The ethnic majority, surely they're always right-coded. Surely opposition to immigration and ethnic minorities is a right-coded thing. No. Economic leftism is often fused with ethnic nationalism. This was true of Australia's Labour Party prior to the 1970s. More recently, it's true of Slovakia's Direction Social Democracy Party and Italy's Five Star Movement. If you're an Italian and you're a socialist, you're likely to oppose immigration. Also, the alliance structure wasn't always like this. We have a historical record, and we know that this isn't written in stone. At the beginning of
Okay, let's leave it there. I'll talk to you later, mate. Bye-bye.